right, and good evening, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Current Events on Tap, a podcast brought to you by the Alex Kirsch Project, where, like the current events, or like the drinks, the current events are on the house. Sorry, I'm a little bit rusty right now. And I am your host, yours truly, Alex Kirsch, pragmatic, progressive, U.S. Army veteran, truck driver, gamer, and streamer. If this is your first time on the show, please do not forget to hit like, share, subscribe, and comment. I am currently streaming live on YouTube, Twitch, and the X platform, formerly known as Twitter. Format of this show is simple. I bring on one or more guests, except for tonight, onto the show and we talk beer or beverage of choice and current events of the week. Each person will discuss their beverage of choice for this hour, whether it's alcoholic or non-alcoholic, it does not matter. Then each person will cover two current events of their choosing. They give the current event, give their assessment, and then each person gets a chance to give their assessment, then we can discuss it. Now, a debate may be possible, but rest assured that you are in a good faith zone, and you will get your chance to get your point across. Now, the point of this space is to make sure that this is a good faith zone and everyone gets their point across. And we have to keep an open mind to find out what the other person has to say. And please remember to keep it within 2 hours. Now, tonight, I am flying solo because I'm going to do a thorough review of the presidential debate that took place on Tuesday between former President Trump and the current Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, first things first, okay? I really wanted to do a live review, but because I had, prep work to do and let alone the fact that I want to make sure I had all my ducks in a row and stuff like that, I could have tried to do fact check in real time, but I really didn't want to do that at the time. Plus, I had a lot of stuff I had to do back here. I had to feed the horses, things like that, take care of the dog. But at the end of the day, I listened to the debate on Tuesday. And all I got to say is that I remember back in June when Trump and Biden had their debate. And Biden did horribly. There's no other way to mask. There's no masking it. Biden did not do a good job in that debate. He looked worn down. He looked decrepit. He just looked out of place. And we have to be honest. We have to call it for what it is. He just did not look up to snuff. Now, I was a little concerned about how Kamala Harris was going to do because I remember in some of the debates when she first ran for office in 2019 and 2020, she didn't perform as well. As a matter of fact, I believe she got less than 1% of the vote. But at the time, she was going against some real heavy hitters. She had Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden. She was competing against some real heavy hitters of the Democratic Party or people that are running on the Democratic ticket. So obviously, she's not going to get nearly as much attention. Now that she's been vice president, she has a little bit more name recognition. But people are still wondering, will it be enough for her to take on Donald Trump? And let me say without a shadow of a doubt, Donald Trump was horrendous. And I'm not just saying that because I can't stand the guy, but he was befuddled. He couldn't stay in topic. He couldn't keep his thoughts in order. He was flip-flopping everywhere, all over the issues. He wouldn't answer questions directly. And I'm definitely going to be talking about that tonight, okay? Because let's be honest, Donald Trump is very good about one thing. He's good at marketing himself, and he's very, very good at the gish gallop. He tries his best to just pile on all these topics in the hopes that it'll throw everybody off, except for the moderators. Now, the moderators did a great job of keeping that in order. Now, people are complaining about the fact that Donald Trump got fact-checked, but yet Kamala Harris didn't get fact-checked. Well, that's what I'm going to be doing here tonight, okay? I will try to be as fair as possible, and I will definitely make sure that I address what fact-checks need to be done. Now, if I miss some, or if I don't bring some up, I've dropped some links in the description below, but if there's more for me to add, I'm just going to close out the window and then I'm going to fact check that right on the spot, basically, because that's one thing I want to do. I want to make sure that the information that gets put out is put out correctly, okay? So basically, that's what the whole intent is tonight, is for me to do a complete, thorough review and what I feel about how the debate went. And, from the get-go, you're just going to see it. Kamala Harris asserted dominance, flat out right from the get-go, because she approached him at his podium to shake his hand. And Donald Trump did not look like he wanted to do so. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into it without actually going to it. But tonight's beer, I'm going right back to a really good solid one. Founder of Solid Gold, a great golden beer, delicious premium lager. It's got a very nice, delicious golden color to it. Absolutely one of my favorite ones that Founders has ever put out. I could literally drink this every day and not get tired of it. But anyway, hopefully everybody's enjoying their weekend, and fall is about upon us, so we're going to start seeing the change of the leaves and whatnot, and fall is one of my favorite seasons. I like to sit down, have a little campfire and whatnot down by the river. It's really fantastic. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off topic, so let's go ahead and just jump right in to the reason why we are all here tonight. All right, so we're just going to start from the very, very beginning. from the start of the debate. Now, I'm going to stop every so often, and I'm going to mute during the commercial breaks, essentially, because, I got to make sure that there's I'm not violating any copyright violations here. So, all right, let's get this party started.
President Donald Trump, their first face-to-face meeting in this presidential election, their first face-to-face meeting ever.
A historic race for president upended just weeks ago. President Biden withdrawing after his last debate. Donald Trump now up against a new opponent.
The candidates separated by the smallest of margins, essentially tied in the polls nationally and in the key battlegrounds, including right here in Pennsylvania, all still very much in play. The ABC News presidential debate starts right now.
This is an ABC News special, the most consequential moment.
Their microphones will only be turned on when it's their turn to speak. No pre-written notes allowed. There is no audience here tonight in this hall at the National Constitution Center. This is an intimate setting for two candidates who have never met.
President Trump won the coin toss. He chose to deliver the final closing statement of the evening. Vice President Harris selected the podium to the right.
So let's now welcome the candidates to the stage. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Donald Trump.
And here she comes, getting ready to assert that dominance. Look at that. She's walking straight to him, and he is trying so hard not to walk. He does not want to confront her whatsoever. That's the funny part. She is setting the stage right now by walking directly to him, and he does not look like he wants to walk up to her. He looks like he wants to completely bypass her. People think, oh, that's nothing. No, it's definitely set in the terms, because had they met in the middle, it could have been like considered, okay, whatever, they're just a mutual bit of respect. But he did not want to shake her hand. You could basically tell, because she walked in front. He's trying to walk behind. Like, they did not want to meet. She tried to be the respectful person in the respectful party, and he decided to basically try to take the coward's way out. So from the get-go, she's already asserting herself, and he is not.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
Nice to see you. Have fun.
Thank you.
Welcome to you both. It's wonderful to have you. It's an honor to have you both here tonight.
Good evening. We are looking forward to a spirited and thoughtful debate.
So let's get started. I want to begin tonight with the issue that voters repeatedly say is their number one issue, and that is the economy and the cost of living in this country. Vice President Harris, you and President Trump were elected 4 years ago, and your opponent on the stage here tonight often asks his supporters, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid. And I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America. I believe in the ambition, the aspirations, the dreams of the American people. And that is why I imagine and have actually a plan to build what I call an opportunity economy. Because here's the thing. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing. And the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000, which is the largest child tax credit that we have given in a long time, so that those young families can afford to buy a crib, buy a car seat, buy clothes for their children. My passion, one of them, is small businesses. My mother raised my sister and me, but there was a woman who helped raise us. We call her our second mother. She was a small business owner. I love our small businesses. My plan is to give a $50,000 tax deduction to start up small businesses, knowing they are part of the backbone of America's economy. My opponent, on the other hand, his plan is to do what he has done before, which is to provide a tax cut for billionaires and big corporations, which will result in $5 trillion to America's deficit. My opponent has a plan that I call the Trump's sales tax, which would be a 20% tax on everyday goods that you rely on to get through the month. Economists have said that Trump sales tax would actually result for middle-class families in about $4,000 more a year, because of his policies and his ideas about what should be the backs of middle-class people paying for tax cuts for billionaires.
President Trump, I'll give you 2 minutes.
So here's the first thing that I'm going to have to, kind of hit back when it comes to Vice President Harris. The question was, are Americans better off today than they were 4 years ago? And she really didn't give an answer on that, okay? Now, how she could have answered that is yes. And the reason why I say yes, they are better off is because let's remember where we were 4 years ago. we were in the middle of the worst pandemic in a like over a century. Hey Jake, how you doing, buddy? Nice to see you. She did not answer the question though. She didn't answer the question whatsoever. She basically just said, I came from a middle class family and this is what I'm going to do. But we are better off simply because we're not dealing with a global pandemic at this point. Now, granted, inflation is right around like 2.9%. There is inflation in different parts of the economy across the country, but as of right now, inflation is at 2.9%. Interest rates are a little bit higher because that is the way the Federal Reserve determined the interest rates essentially. So that's where that's all coming from. And like I'm going to get into a little bit later about grocery bills and like gas prices, stuff like that. In the link below, I actually referenced to Mr. Global 2. He actually has a YouTube channel. He's actually worked in the oil industry and he's talked about like why gas prices are so high. So I don't want to steal his thunder, but check in my link below and check out that video. There's a lot of information in there. It's really, really good information. And you know, he's not even a Democrat. He's not a Republican. He's just a guy that talks about like why the oil industry is the way it is. Who sets the gas prices? Why are gas prices so high? It's not just any one person that's basically behind this whole thing. So, but the fact of the matter is, she didn't answer the question. She definitely could have. And she could have found a better way to answer that question instead of like, but she's doing it just to kind of relate to the audience. She can give a plan, but she has to be able to answer the question first. But let's be honest though, Trump really didn't answer the question. He danced around the whole thing because what does Trump do? He deflects, he shifts the goalposts. He does not address the question at this point. So let's see what Donald Trump says once again.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that. We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because it was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. They're taking in billions of dollars from China and other places. They've left the tariffs on. When I had it, I had tariffs, and yet I had no inflation. Look, we've had a terrible economy because inflation which is really known as a country buster. It breaks up countries. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. We were at 21%, but that's being generous because many things are 50, 60, 70, and 80% higher than they were just a few years ago. This has been a disaster for people, for the middle class, but for every class. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics, and also unions. Unions are going to be affected very soon. And you see what's happening. You see what's happening with towns throughout the United States. You look at Springfield, Ohio. You look at Aurora in Colorado. They are taking over the towns. They're taking over buildings. They're going in violently. These are the people that Xi and Biden led into our country, and they're destroying our country. They're dangerous. They're at the highest level of criminality. And we have to get them out. We have to get them out fast. I created one of the greatest economies in the history of our country. I'll do it again and even better.
Okay, so once again, here's the thing. What people don't need to remember, though, is that Trump's tariffs actually hurt American farmers. American farmers actually blame Trump for the fact that, because the people that benefit the most from this is the importing country, essentially. So we are all about global trade, whether it's China, Taiwan, or Ukraine, other countries, right? But Trump doesn't understand these things because he thinks that he understands how the global economy works. He doesn't. The only thing that he knows is how to market himself, his name, and whatnot. He doesn't understand that these tariffs actually did hurt the American people. They hurt the American farmer because they were executed so poorly. Now, why the Biden-Harris campaign kept them on, I have no idea. That's something I still need to look into. But again, there's a lot of information here, and I didn't have time to go over all of it. But the thing is, like, the answer to building the better economy isn't tariffs. It's not. That's not how great economies build off of. And he's always talking about like how the worst inflation that this country has ever seen. That's also not necessarily true. The worst time that we've ever seen inflation was actually, a few decades ago, essentially. But, I'd have to look up the exact date and whatsoever. So let's go ahead and do that right now. All right, let's go ahead and do this real quick, okay? So, oh, come on. Good Lord Almighty, I cannot type for shit, okay? Worst inflation in U.S. history. 1980 actually was the worst inflation at 14%. So his claim about 21% is incorrect essentially, but that's just Donald Trump being Donald Trump. He doesn't know his information whatsoever. So, and the thing is, he likes to bring up, we had the greatest economy the country's ever seen. Even his economy was not the greatest the country's ever seen. We have to remember something. Donald Trump inherited a booming economy with growing GDP, growing stock market, unemployment decreasing significantly throughout the 8 years of Obama. When Obama took over, he basically inherited a recession, 2 wars, an economy in the tank from George Bush because he invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. Obama basically took over at a very critical time and brought us back from the brink. Trump took credit for an economy he did not create. He just maintained it, and then he screwed it all up when COVID hit, basically. I mean, people can say, oh, that's not true. It's 100% true. It's because, and we're going to get into COVID later on down the line. But he claims that they have the greatest economy that we've ever seen. It's not, though. Like, economic experts all across, like whether it's Economic Forum, the Wall Street Journal, all these different institutions that have actually done research on this know that it was not the greatest economy that the world has ever seen. It's not the greatest economy that the world has ever seen or the United States has ever seen. But he likes to say that because the more you say it, the more you're likely to believe it, essentially. So, yeah, it's a crock of shit, basically. And as far as like what's going on in Aurora and Springfield, listen, we're going to get into that. But I looked it up. The situation in Aurora, gang members have already been arrested. And basically, Aurora police are saying, listen, it's not as bad as people are making out to be. The guys that have actually been responsible for this have already been arrested. But I'm going to get into Springfield here a little bit later because that part is hilarious, what Trump is talking about.
We're going to get to immigration and border security during this debate, but I would like to let Vice President Harris respond on the economy here.
Well, I would love to. Let's talk about what Donald Trump left us. Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Donald Trump left us the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. And what we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess.
So now people are saying, why is it she's laying out 9/11? I'm pretty sure she's also bringing up the fact that the people that attacked our nation's capital weren't Islamic terrorists. They weren't even people from other countries. They were our own citizens that attacked our nation's capital. They attacked our Capitol police officers based upon a lie that the election was stolen when the election was not stolen. There is still no proof to back up any of this stuff. That's what people need to understand. She's not trying to downplay what happened on 9/11. She's more than likely talking about the fact that people, our own citizens, attacked our nation's capital based on a lie.
What we have done and what I intend to do to be a president for all Americans.
President.
Now, before Trump steps in saying, oh, I know nothing about Project 2025, he's referred in Project 2025 over 100 times, for crying out loud. His own running mate gives the foreword in Project 2025. His press secretary that says, oh, we know nothing about it, is even quoted off camera, like audio recording saying, oh my God, we love this Project 2025. He could say, I know nothing about it, but he's about to say, I know nothing about it, I've heard nothing about it, but some parts I agree, some parts I disagree. Okay, if you know nothing about it, then how can you agree or disagree with it? I mean, it's insane. He just can't seem to stay on track after this.
And Trump will give you a minute here to respond.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it.
Let's be fair. Donald Trump doesn't like to read anything, honestly. Trump doesn't like to read. All of the people that worked on his administration that weren't his bootlickers, essentially, whether it was, the Joint Chief of Staff, Mark Milley, whether it was Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, whether it was his Chief of Staff, John Kelly, they all say the same thing. He does not like to read. Every single time there's an intelligence report, he would say, well, I heard on Fox News this. He doesn't like to read intelligence reports. So the fact that he says, I don't want to read it, I don't want anything about it, well, that's not surprising because he doesn't really like to read anything. He claims he read the Bible, which we all know that's a crock of shit. He's never read the Bible a day in his life. He knows nothing about it. And for crying out loud, the guy said 2 Corinthians. It's all written right there. What does it say in 2 Corinthians for crying out loud? Hell, I don't even know what it is. And I can look it up right now. But the thing is, like, he doesn't understand these concepts. But the funniest part is like, the guy that was his personal aide, John McEntee, helped write Project 2025. And John McEntee goes to the Mar-a-Lago all the time. You mean to tell me that they have never talked about Project 2025? I find that very hard to believe.
This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas, I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference. I have nothing to do. Everybody knows I'm an open book. Everybody knows what I'm going to do. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy like I did before.
Didn't create it. You did not create it. You inherited it, and then you just maintained it until you screwed it up.
We had the greatest economy. We got hit with a pandemic, and the pandemic was not since 1917, where 100 million people died, has there been anything like it. We did a phenomenal job with the pandemic.
Nope.
We handed them over a country where the economy and where the stock market was higher than it was before the pandemic came in. Nobody.
And right now, the stock market is higher than it's ever been, even when he was in office. That's the truth. Google it. GTS. Google that shit. I'm telling you.
Nobody's ever seen anything like it. We made ventilators for the entire world. We got gowns, we got masks, we did things that nobody thought possible. And people give me credit for rebuilding the military. They give me credit for a lot of things, but not enough credit for the great job we did with the pandemic.
He always says we rebuilt the military. Where? Where did he rebuild the military? I was in the military when he was the commander-in-chief, okay? Where did he rebuild the military? What was it like, the funding for the Defense Department? We are still funding the DOD. We are almost to $1 trillion of how much we spend on our national defense, okay? We spend more on national defense than all other nations, first world nations combined, essentially. So how did he rebuild the military? I would love to know, how did he rebuild the military? No one seems to know, and no one seems to actually have the answers on how he rebuilt it.
But the only jobs they got were bounce back jobs. These were jobs bounce back, and it bounced back and it went to their benefit. But I was the one that created them. They know it, and so does everybody else.
Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond.
So Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have reviewed our relative plans for the future of America. What Goldman Sachs has said is that Donald Trump's plan would make the economy worse. Mine would strengthen the economy. What the Wharton School has said is Donald Trump's plan would actually explode the deficit. 16 Nobel laureates have described his economic plan as something that would increase inflation and by the middle of next year would invite a recession. You just have to look at where we are and where we stand on the issues. And I'd invite you to know that Donald Trump actually has no plan for you because he is more interested in defending himself than he is in looking out for you.
100% accurate. She's already on it. Donald Trump does not care about the American people. I can tell you this because I've read many, many books about this guy, and there's a consistent pattern. The thing with Donald Trump is that he cares about these 3 things: your money, your love, and your loyalty. The second you speak out against him, he denounces you 100% and says, I barely knew you. He does that all the time. But if anybody thinks that he's running to save this country, you're delusional, okay? He's doing it to save himself because he knows that, he's royally screwed, essentially. But I'm digressing, essentially. Now, the Wharton School has not really clarified on the statement. Goldman Sachs says that, Kamala Harris is a little stretching the truth a little bit. But they did say that her economy, should it continue on the same path, would do better. And it's actually proven that tax cuts to the super wealthy actually increases our national debt because it offsets the cost to us. My taxes increased because of his tax cuts. Because you have to remember something. The tax cuts to the super wealthy is this whole concept of trickle-down economics that Reagan tried to pass down. It actually doesn't benefit anybody. As a matter of fact, during the 1950s, it's actually been proven. In the 1950s, when the super wealthy were taxed at a much higher percentage, what did that do? It funded projects like the interstate highway system, essentially. It built our infrastructure system. It made our infrastructure system some of the best in the world, essentially, at that point. But now, because this whole bullshit concept of trickle-down economics, somehow that's better for our country? Really? Trickle-down economics is a farce. It is a crock of shit. It does not work, essentially. And it's not because we are punishing people just because they're successful. That's not what it is. Giving them tax cuts that offsets to me is punishing me when I am not a part of the 1%. And yet we're talking about what's fair. It's not. It's craziness.
It's just a soundbite. They gave her that to say. Look, I went to the Wharton School of Finance,
and his professor said he was one of the dumbest students he ever had.
And many of those professors, the top professors, think my plan is a brilliant plan. It's a
no, it hasn't been proven.
Great plan. It's a plan that's going to bring up our worth, our value as a country. It's going to make people want to be able to go and work and create jobs and create a lot of good, solid money for our country. And just to finish off, she doesn't have a plan. She copied Biden's plan, and it's like 4 sentences, like run, spot, run. 4 sentences that are just, oh, we'll try and lower taxes. She doesn't have a plan. Take a look at her plan. She doesn't have a.
Okay, listen to that. Just put that in the back of your mind, okay? Donald Trump says she doesn't have a plan. You all know what's going to happen. It's coming. It's definitely coming.
Plan.
Mr. President, I do want to drill down on something you both brought up. The Vice President brought up your tariffs. You responded, and let's drill down on this, because your plan is what she calls is essentially a national sales tax. Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board. You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country. As you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication, arguing it costs the typical family nearly $4,000 a year. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have, and who's going to have higher prices, is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years. I was the only president ever. China was paying us hundreds of billions of dollars, and so were other countries. And, you know, if she doesn't like them, they should have gone out and they should have immediately cut the tariffs. But those tariffs are there 3.5 years now under their administration. We are going to take in billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. I had no inflation, virtually no inflation. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country, because I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else.
That's a lie. I see people buying stuff like that all the time. People are buying bacon. People are buying cereal. He's lying once again. I mean, do people really think that no one is able to go out and buy a bunch of groceries? I see it all the time. I see it at major Walmarts. I see it at Myers. I see it at grocery stores all the time. People are still able to go out and buy stuff. You know, some people might be a little upset about the prices, but they still buy the material. They still buy the groceries. They still buy it all. Like, I don't know why people keep saying this. I mean, maybe in your area, maybe you're buying from like a fresh market or something like that, where everything is like twice as expensive, because at fresh markets, they tend to be more expensive. But people not able to buy cereal? Really? You're really going to tell me people aren't able to buy cereal? When was the last time he's been to a grocery store, honestly? Has he even ever been to a grocery store?
The people of our country are absolutely dying with what they've done. They've destroyed the economy.
Nope.
And all you have to do is look at a poll. The polls say 80 and 85 and even 90% that the Trump economy was great, that their economy was terrible.
Vice President Harris, I do want to ask for your response, and you heard what the president said there, because the Biden administration did keep a number of the Trump tariffs in place. So how do you respond?
Well, let's be clear that the Trump administration resulted in a trade deficit, one of the highest we've ever seen in the history of America. He invited trade wars. You want to talk about his deal with China? What he ended up doing is, under Donald Trump's presidency, he ended up selling American chips to China to help them improve and modernize their military, basically sold us out, when a policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century.
Thank you to the CHIPS Act, by the way, okay? Now, what is the CHIPS Act? The CHIPS Act is basically the plan for, like, semiconductors, essentially. With the CHIPS Act that was actually signed in 2022, This basically means that more plants are going to get built across the country because either we control the market or China does or our competition does. And we can't let that happen. I would much rather that we control the initiative and we control the jobs and we control the market when it comes down to semiconductors. Donald Trump's plans, however, made it to where China had the advantage essentially. It's better for us if we actually have a strong economy and we have strong jobs because semiconductors, everybody uses semiconductors for something, whether it's computers, cars, phones. I mean, they are a part of everyday life. It's so important that we make sure that we control that market. Yes, we might still import some from Taiwan, but would it be better for us to control that market instead of our adversaries, instead of like those like China? It's important that we control this, which is why the CHIPS Act is so important. Because now more factories are getting built in places like Ohio, they're getting built in Michigan, they're getting built in Texas. These are good American jobs. Either we control it or our adversaries do. Take your pick, people. Take your pick.
Which means focusing on the details of what that requires, focusing on relationships with our allies, focusing on investing in American-based technology so that we win the race on AI, on quantum computing, focusing on what we need to do to support America's workforce so that we don't end up having on the short end of the stick in terms of workers' rights. But what Donald Trump did, let's talk about this, with COVID, is he actually thanked President Xi for what he did during COVID. Look at his tweet. Thank you, President Xi, exclamation point, when we know that Xi was responsible for lacking and not giving us transparency about the origins of COVID.
President Trump, I'll let you respond.
First of all, they bought their chips from Taiwan. We hardly make chips anymore because of philosophies like they have and policies like they have. I don't say her because she has no policy. Everything that she believed 3 years ago and 4 years ago is out the window. She's going to my philosophy now. In fact, I was going to send her a MAGA hat. She's gone to my philosophy. But if she ever got elected, she'd change it. And it will be the end of our country. She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist.
Trump can't even define what Marxism is. Does anybody even know what Marxism means? I mean, I know Marxists and I talk to them on Twitter. They say she's not a Marxist by any means. Like, if she's a Marxist, she's like the worst one.
Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well. But when you look at what she's done to our country, and when you look at these millions and millions of people that are pouring into our country monthly, where it's, I believe, 21 million people, not the 15 that people say, and I think it's a lot higher than the 21. That's bigger than New York State pouring in. And just look at what they're doing to our country. They're criminals. Many of these people coming in are criminals. And that's bad for our economy, too. You know, you mentioned before, we'll talk about immigration later. Well, bad immigration is the worst thing that can happen to our economy. They have, and she has, destroyed our country with policy that's insane. Almost policy that you'd say they have to hate our country.
President Trump, thank you. Lindsay?
I want to turn to the issue of abortion. President Trump, you've often...
And this is where she eats his lunch, essentially. This is where she crushes his ass because he has no answer.
touted that you were able to kill Roe v. Wade. Last year, you said that you were proud to be the most pro-life president in American history. Then last month, you said that your administration would be great for women and their reproductive rights. In your home state of Florida, you surprised many with regard to your 6-week abortion ban because you initially had said that it was too short. And you said, quote, I'm going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. But then the very next day, you reversed course and said you would vote to support the 6-week ban. Vice President Harris says that women shouldn't trust you on the issue of abortion because you've changed your position so many times. Therefore, why should they trust you?
Well, the reason I'm doing that vote is because the plan is, as you know, the vote is, they have abortion.
And here's my baby girl, Dash. Hey, Dash. Yep, my little studio cat.
In the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job, but the governor before.
Notice how he says West Virginia? How can he get that one wrong? I know he corrects himself later on, but he says West Virginia. I think it's hilarious.
He said the baby will be born, and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby.
So this is one of the biggest bullshit stories that he likes to share. He doesn't understand the context of what they are speaking of, okay? First things first. A woman is not going to give birth to a perfectly healthy baby and they're going to decide whether to kill it or not. That's not how this works, okay? Ash, baby girl, don't do that. What they're talking about, and the governor at the time even said, this is in the most severe cases. We're talking about like if the baby is malformed, or if like the baby has like is missing kidneys, or if there's something wrong with the baby where it could suffer. That's what they're talking about essentially. It's not executing the baby, for crying out loud. This kind of thing does not happen. When it comes down to late-term abortions, this is only done in the most extreme cases, essentially. We're talking about like the fact that it's the health of the mother. It's the health of the baby, essentially. If she gives birth or she continues this pregnancy, she is going to die. That's what it's about. But yet Donald Trump is consistently wrong on this issue. He consistently talks about how, oh yeah, she gives birth to the baby and it's like, hey, let's go ahead and think about killing this baby. That's not what the issue is. The baby is born. It's got mermaid syndrome. It's missing kidneys. It's missing a lung. It's missing half of its brain. It's not going to function properly. It's not going to be able to survive, essentially. It's going to die a very painful death. This is what they're talking about. This is what the issue is. This is not a thing. They have no examples of babies being born and then just being executed right there on the spot, okay? That's not a thing. And, you know, if anybody says, and if you want to drop a link in the comment section, go ahead. I'll take a look at it later. But it's not something that actually does happen. And he's 100% wrong about this. He doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's saying this because he knows it's going to incite his base. He knows it's going to make people emotional. They're not going to be able to think clearly. They're going to say, oh my God, they're killing babies all the time, okay? You know, I just wish they had this passion every time a school shooting happened, but, you know, they're just going to offer thoughts and prayers for that. So how about thoughts and prayers for here?
And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical in that. And her vice presidential pick, which I think was a horrible pick, by the way, for our country, because he is really out of it. But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay. And that's not okay with me, hence the vote. But what I did is something for 52 years. They've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. And through the genius and heart and strength of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do that. Now, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I believe strongly in it. Ronald Reagan did also. 85% of Republicans do. Exceptions. Very important.
That's not true, though. That is not true. As a matter of fact, we've got cases that show that women have had to leave their states in order. They've had to leave their states for their lives, essentially. In the state of Ohio, there was a 10-year-old victim of rape. I'm just going to say rape like that. She was a victim of rape, and she had to leave the state of Ohio to go to Indiana because she was raped by a monster, an absolute monster. Doesn't matter where they're from, they are monsters, flat out. She had to go to another state to get an abortion. Katie Cox, a woman from Texas. She was already a mother of 2 children. Her husband and her were expecting this 3rd child, but it wasn't going to happen. This child was going to die. Outside the womb or inside the womb. Now, inside the womb, it could have put her in sepsis. It could have put her life at risk. And initially, they had Texas judges that sided with her and said, yeah, you can get this abortion because it's the life of the mother. Ken Paxton, the attorney general from Texas, said, no, you're not going to do it. Why? It's not because he actually gives a shit. He's not pro-life. He is pro-birth. That's what it is. So this whole concept of like, oh, I believe in it very strongly. And he's going to give this bullshit about how every legal scholar, he has never named one legal scholar that's on board with this. He's not named anybody that says, yes, this is what we wanted, because we didn't.
But we were able to get it, and now states are voting on it. And for the first time, you're going to see, look, this is an issue that's torn our country apart for 52 years.
You think?
Every legal scholar, every Democrat, every Republican, liberal, conservative,
Who, Donald Trump? What legal scholars are you talking about? Who are you speaking of? What is the name of this legal scholar? Was it Fred Smith from Indiana and Paul Jones? Who is it? Who are these people you're speaking of?
all wanted this issue to be brought back to the states where the people could vote. And that's what happened. Now, Ohio, the vote was somewhat liberal. Kansas, the vote was somewhat liberal, much more liberal than people would have thought. But each individual state is voting. It's the vote of the people now. It's not tied up in the federal government. I did a great service in doing it. It took courage to do it. And the Supreme Court had great courage in doing it. And I give tremendous credit to those 6 justices.
After the overturning of Roe v. Wade, women that became impregnated due to rape increased by like 60,000, I think it was, the number I last checked. 60,000. I want y'all to think about that. That's how many women were impregnated as a result of the overturning of Roe v. Wade due to being raped. Are y'all okay with this? Those that voted for the overturning of Roe v. Wade, are you all okay with that? I mean, seriously.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact. Let's understand how we got here. Donald Trump hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade.
Okay, a little bit of history here, okay? When Brett Kavanaugh was, identified to be the next Supreme Court pick, Donald Trump did not want Brett Kavanaugh. He was very specific that he wanted Amy Coney Barrett. Why? Because of her strong pro-life views, okay? When they convinced him to go with Brett Kavanaugh, he was really upset about it. He did not want Brett Kavanaugh to be that next Supreme Court justice pick. But he listened to the people and says, listen, he's going to support you. He's got your back. But he knew. And the fact of the matter is that Mitch McConnell supported Donald Trump, making sure that he got every Supreme Court justice pick that he wanted. He kept Amy Coney Barrett in his back pocket in the event of Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying. When she did die, he already had a Supreme Court justice pick. And he picked her, and she got accelerated to the front of the line, and she did her little briefing, and she did her little examination with the Senate. And then she got voted and got sworn in, essentially. That's how it happened. But of course, then when, Ketanji Brown Jackson became the next Supreme Court Justice, Mitch McConnell once again tried to hold her nomination off. Why? Because he's a partisan hack.
And they did exactly as he intended. And now in over 20 states, there are Trump abortion bans, which make it criminal for a doctor or nurse to provide health care. In one state, it provides prison for life. Trump abortion bans that make no exception even for rape and incest, which understand what that means. A survivor of a crime of violation to their body does not have the right to make a decision about what happens to their body next. That is immoral. And one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body. I have talked with women around our country. You want to talk about this is what people wanted?
And I believe what Kamala Harris is saying much more than Donald Trump, because the cases that she's talking about are people that have actually lived this.
Pregnant women who want to carry a pregnancy to term, suffering from a miscarriage, being denied care.
Notice how he does not look at her. Why does he not look at her? She's looking right at him, and he does not look at her. What a baby.
In an emergency room because the healthcare providers are afraid they might go to jail, and she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot.
Yep.
She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that. A 12 or 13-year-old survivor of incest being forced to carry a pregnancy to term. They don't want that. And I pledge to you, when Congress passes a bill to put back in place the protections of Roe v. Wade, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. But
we got to win the House, though. The Democrats have got to win the House. And it's not going to be easy because right now the conservative base has a very slim majority in Congress, and we have a very slim majority in the Senate. So it's not going to be easy because if we take the House, but we don't take the Senate, it's pretty much all for naught.
Understand, if Donald Trump were to be reelected, he will sign a national abortion ban. Understand, in his Project 2025, there would be a national abortion, a monitor that would be monitoring your pregnancies, your miscarriages.
And that already happened in the state of Missouri. There was a guy, a doctor in the state of Missouri that actually had a database of women's menstrual cycles. You can look it up. If you think this cannot happen, I mean, this is what big government looks like. For a party that says they are the party of limited government, they sure do like to have people that are in control of like women's lives. They got guys that have databases of women's menstrual cycles. I mean, if women have that on their smartphones, it's still private information. It's no different from like your banking information. Like nobody else should have access to that information except for you and your healthcare provider, essentially. And the fact that in the state of Missouri, this guy actually had the audacity to keep track of women's menstrual cycles, whether they had a miscarriage or not, that is complete. Big Brother is watching you crap. But this is the party of limited government that wants this? Are you fucking kidding me? Absolutely not.
I think the American people believe that certain freedoms, in particular the freedom to make decisions about one's own body, should not be made by the government.
Thank you, Vice President Harris.
Well, there she goes again.
She ate it. She fucking got it.
It's a lie. I'm not signing a ban, and there's no reason to sign a ban because we've gotten what everybody wanted.
What people? Who everyone wanted? Nobody wanted this.
Democrats.
Okay, I stand corrected, actually. Some people did want this, okay? It was people that are pro-life. Oh, I'm sorry, not pro-life. They are pro-birth, okay? Because let's be honest. Every single time the topic of like maternity leave, paternity leave, maternal health mortality rate, making sure that hospitals are well funded, making sure that, you know, pregnancy centers are well funded, to make sure that women have adequate care. Anytime a Democrat brings this up, the Republicans wonder, well, how are we going to pay for this? They don't want people to be like, freeloaders on the system, but they don't want to make sure that the children are well taken care of after they are born. Once you're in the womb, you're considered sacred, but once you're born, you are on your own. As George Carlin said, they don't give a shit about children once they're born. They really don't give a damn.
Republicans and everybody else and every legal scholar wanted it to be brought back into the states, and the states are voting, and it may take a little time, but for 52 years, this issue has torn our country apart, and they've wanted it back in the states, and I did something that nobody thought was possible. The states are now voting. What she says is an absolute lie. And as far as the abortion ban, no, I'm not in favor of abortion ban, but it doesn't matter because this issue has now been taken over by the states.
Would you veto a national abortion ban if it came to your desk?
Well, I won't have to because, again, two things. Number one, she said she'll go back to Congress. She'll never get the vote. It's impossible for her to get the vote, especially now with the 50-50 and essentially 50-50 in both Senate and the House. She's not going to get the vote. She can't get the vote. She won't even come close to it. So it's just talk. You know what it reminds me of? When they said they're going to get student loans terminated, and it ended up...
Listen to him go off on a different tangent. He's not even... We are nowhere near talking about student loans, but y'all need to remember something. Student loans have actually been getting paid off. Like, more people have been getting their student... Not paid off, but forgiven. And let's talk about that real quick, okay? When people pay into student loans, you're actually paying very little into the loan itself. You're paying more into the interest. That's just what makes it predatory, essentially. It makes it predatory for people to, like, when they pay into it. It's different, way different from, like, a car loan. It's different from, like, a house loan and whatnot. Because, like, for example, the house that I live in, it's a fixed rate. It's stuck at 1%. But with student loans, it's different. They change the rate at every given time. They say, hey, you could get this paid off in 10 years. Then 10 years becomes 15. Then it becomes 20. Some people have been paying off student loans for 30 years. And like your $30,000 student loan debt loan is now $60,000, which you're paying into. Basically, if somebody paid $30,000 into a student loan and they've paid $40,000, we basically said, you're good, you're off the hook now. And guess who needs to eat that now? The education programs that actually made that student loan, they need to eat that cost because they are making a grip of money with student concessions, football games, sports, what have you. All those programs, and they always have enough money to build new buildings and whatnot, state-of-the-art centers and whatnot, but yet they can't eat the cost of people that have gone to get education. I mean, there's a lot that I could go into as far as this, but, you know, I don't want this stream to take forever, so.
Being a total catastrophe. The student loans, and then I think probably her boss, if you call him a boss, he spends all his time on the beach. But look, her boss went out and said, we'll
You spend all your time at a golf course. Okay.
do it again. We'll do it a different way. And he went out, got rejected again by the Supreme Court. So all these students got taunted with this whole thing about this whole idea. And how unfair that would have been, part of the reason they lost, to the millions and millions of people that had to pay off their student loans. They didn't get it for free, but they...
Well, guess what, okay? My wife had to pay off her student loans, you know, a different way, but she's paid off her student loans, and even she agrees. I would rather people not have to be saddled with that debt, that predatory debt of student loan payments, because she had to go through it, and it took her almost 20 years to pay off her student loans. And she has a great credit score. She pays her bills, she pays her taxes and whatnot, just like me. But yet it's so predatory, and people say, oh, why don't I just join the military? It still takes you about 10 to 20 years to pay off your student loans. It's obscene.
They were saying it's the same way that they talked about that they talk about abortion.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with...
Why did you not discuss this with your running mate? This goes to show that they are not on the same sheet of music. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are not on the same sheet of music. Everybody should be pointing this out. I was like, well, wait a second. Why are they not talking to each other about this? It's because the reason why Trump picked J.D. Vance is because he needs a guy to be a yes man. Not a guy that's competent. He wants a guy that is a yes man. That's all he wants. He doesn't want somebody that's good at their job. He doesn't want somebody that is, you know, capable of telling him, Mr. President, I don't think you should do this. He doesn't want to hear that. He wants somebody to say, yes, Mr. President.
JD, in all fairness, JD, and I don't mind if he has a certain view, but I think he was speaking for me, but I really didn't. Look, we don't have to discuss it because she'd never be able to get it, just like she couldn't get student loans. They couldn't get student loans. They didn't even...
Yeah, they actually have, but you don't know anything about this stuff because you don't fucking read.
They taunted young people and a lot of other people that had loans. They can never get this approved. So it doesn't matter what she says about going to Congress. Well, wonderful. Let's go to Congress. Do it. But the fact is that for years, they wanted to get it out of Congress and out of the federal government. And we did something that everybody said couldn't be done. And now you have a vote of the people on abortion.
Vice President Harris, I want to give you your time to respond. But I do want to ask, would you support any restrictions on a woman's right to an abortion?
I wish you would have answered this question, honestly, because this is a question that you get all the time. Especially when you're
is a woman carrying a pregnancy to term and asking for an abortion. That is not happening. It's insulting to the women of America. And understand what has been happening under Donald Trump's abortion bans. Couples who pray and dream of having a family are being denied IVF treatments.
Like in Alabama. That's because he overturned Roe v. Wade. Now they consider embryos human beings. They consider them people. They're not, okay? They're embryos.
What is happening in our country?
Yes, we all started as embryos, okay? All right? We also started as, like, sperm at one point, okay? That doesn't mean that, like, if a dude ejaculates on the floor and I shoot it with a shotgun, am I going to be convicted of a crime or something like that? Seriously, let's be adults here.
Working people, working women who are working 1 or 2 jobs, who can barely afford childcare as it is, have to travel to another state to get on a plane sitting next to strangers to go and get the health care she needs.
And here's the thing. Anybody that says, oh, well, you know, they could always just pick up and move to another state. If you live in Mississippi and they have an abortion ban, why not move to another state? Do people not understand that that costs money? Let alone the fact that, you know, you can't just pick up your life and move to another state that you've never been to because there's no guarantee there's going to be a job in place. And for all you don't know her situation. You don't know how she got pregnant. But you know who's not got to worry about this? The elites, the people in the top 1%. Some guy that's a rich multimillionaire that's also the pastor of his church. He's going to get his mistress pregnant and he's going to fly her out to a place like California or Michigan or a place where she can get that abortion taken care of, and he'll pay her off so she doesn't talk. I know stuff like that has happened. I can't find any cases of it, but I'm sure you could if you looked it up right now. But this is why it is a problem. It's because the middle to low income people cannot afford to pick up their lives and move or go to another state, especially if you're going to have people at checkpoints checking to see, oh, well, are you pregnant? I'm going to arrest you, and I'm going to arrest you for, you know, transporting across state lines to put the, this is the problem. And people think this is not going to happen. But the fact of the matter is Katie Cox, they tried to prevent her from traveling. And in Ohio, with a 10-year-old girl, they got mad at the doctor in Indiana for performing the abortion. They got more mad about that than the actual crime that was forced upon her, essentially.
Barely can afford to do it, and what you are putting her through is unconscionable. And the people of America have not.
Look how shamed he is. That guy is just looks worn down and he looks tired. He's like, I never should have been here.
The majority of Americans believe in a woman's right to make decisions about her own body. And that is why in every state where this issue has been on the ballot, in red and blue states both, the people of America have voted for freedom.
Vice President Harris,
Excuse me, I have to respond. Another lie. It's another lie. I have been a leader on IVF, which is fertilization. The IVF, I have been a leader. In fact, when they got a very negative decision on IVF from the Alabama courts, I saw the people of Alabama and the legislature 2 days later voted it in. I've been a leader on it. They know that, and everybody else knows it. I have been a leader on fertilization, IVF. And the other thing, you should ask, will she allow abortion in the 8th month, 9th month, 7th month?
Come on.
Okay, would you do that? Why don't you ask her that question?
Why don't you answer the question? Would you
because
veto?
Under Roe v.
Answer
Wade,
the question, would you veto?
you could do abortions in the 7th month.
There's no other way to look at it. I mean, people can say, oh, I've heard cases. You've heard, but do you have proof of it?
True.
And probably after birth. Just look at the
Probably after birth, he says. He does not know what he's talking about. He's spitballing now.
former governor of Virginia. The governor of Virginia said, we put the baby aside and then we determine what we want to.
And honestly, it's not just one doctor in the family. It's like 1 to 3 physicians that have to make this decision. Why? Because it's good to have an outside opinion. Now, I know people are like, oh, what about the person that's... Listen, I've already seen that topic, and she says, no, listen, I understand. I misspoke on this, and I shouldn't have said it.
To do with the baby.
President Trump, thank you.
We're going to turn now to immigration and border security. We
This is the one where it's gonna be a bit dicey here for Vice President Harris.
know it's an issue that's important to Republicans, Democrats, voters across the board in this country. Vice President Harris, you were tasked by President Biden with getting to the root causes of migration from Central America. We know that illegal border crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration. This past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly. But my question to you tonight is, why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently from President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill, which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime, trying to do their job. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. I know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl.
And I want everybody to understand something. The majority of people that are smuggling fentanyl into the country are not immigrants. They are American citizens. This is from Border Patrol. The majority of people that are smuggling in fentanyl are not immigrants. They are American citizens doing this.
In our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress, and said, kill the bill. And you know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem.
And there are senators and congressmen out all saying, we cannot give them this victory. We cannot give Biden this victory. Now listen. The Biden administration is no friend to Border Patrol. As a matter of fact, a lot of Border Patrol agents speak out against the Biden administration. Okay, fine, okay? I understand. You feel like you're not able to do your jobs. I understand that, okay? I get it, right? I'm not going to attack the Border Patrol for doing their jobs, okay? It's no different than, like, if a good cop does their job, I'm not going to be critical of them. But if you're a shitty cop, then yes, I'm going to be critical. Same thing with Border Patrol. If you're a shitty Border Patrol agent, then yes, I'm going to blast you for it, okay? But if you're a good Border Patrol agent, you're not going to hear any beef from me, okay? It's case-by-case basis, essentially. But the thing is that the Border Patrol Union said this was a good bill. It's not a perfect bill, but it was a step in the right direction. It was one of the most extensive bills and probably one of the better bills that they'd seen in a long time. But Donald Trump said, kill this bill because we cannot give Joe Biden this victory. He did not want them to have this victory. He put partisan politics ahead of the country.
And understand, this comes at a time where the people of our country actually need a leader who engages in solutions, who actually addresses the problems at hand. But what we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And I'll tell you something, he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised.
And he already has. He already has. They asked about the economy. He talks about immigration. They talk about, abortion. He talks about immigration. I mean, for crying out loud. And he's going to keep talking about immigration, even though it's not the topic of discussion.
And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch.
Yeah.
You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer.
He's going to talk about sharks and batteries and stuff like that. He's going to talk about, like, I went out to a place and I said, hey, listen, what if I go out to the ocean and then the battery goes out and the boat starts to sink and then there's like a battery in the water and then a shark comes up. He's like, well, Mr. President, sir, I've never been asked that question before. And it's like, I would much rather be electrocuted than eaten by... Who the fuck talks about stuff like that? Seriously, what kind of what... People think this is, like, good stuff, honestly. I mean, it's weird enough when he's doing this little... his little... I can't... Like, what is that all about, essentially? But he just talks about nonsense. And the thing is that there's a show out of Las Vegas called Pushing the Limits, okay? I've actually called it the show. The guy's a staunch independent, but he has gone to both both Harris and Trump rallies, okay? And he has seen personally, physically, he has seen Trump goers leaving when Trump is on stage. Why? Because he's talking utter nonsense. He is talking about things that nobody cares about. She is on the money. People leave his speeches halfway through because he's just talking utter nonsense. Now, maybe it's because they just want to beat the rush out of the parking lot. I don't know. Don't care. But the fact of the matter is people do leave because he talks utter nonsense. I mean, he was talking about Hannibal Lecter. He's talked about windmills causing cancer, which is not true. But this is your guy? Listen, I understand that Biden has had gaffes, but my God, Trump has had some serious gaffes.
And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
Yep.
And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires.
He would talk about, we're going to do things to the likes of which nobody's ever seen or ever thought possible. That's all he ever says. We will do things to the likes of which nobody has ever seen or ever thought possible. And when he says, my opponents have done things to the likes of which nobody has ever seen or ever thought possible, that's all he ever says. Not a policy.
And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so? That would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border.
First, let me respond as to the rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to.
I love how she baited him into it because that is such a soft spot for him. That is such a sensitive topic for him. Because what's one thing that Trump loves? He loves the attention he gets. He loves the attention he gets. When you go after things like that, oh yeah, he's gonna respond. She baited him perfectly. And the best way I've heard about this is like, those Bugs Bunny cartoons where Bugs Bunny is getting chased by Elmer Fudd or something like that, or Wile E. Coyote. And what he does is he draws like a little tunnel on a cave entrance, something like that, and then he pulls the wall into it, and then the guy runs right smack into it. That's exactly what Trump is doing right now, and I love it.
Her rallies, there's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there.
No proof.
And then
Not
showing
true.
them in a different light. So
true.
she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies.
She is just loving this.
We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened
We're not a failing nation. I don't know why he says this. I don't know why he hates America so much.
3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people.
That is not true. Once again, that is not true. As a matter of fact, the woman that posted that article saying she heard it from a neighbor has recanted her story and said, I did not mean to cause this much harm towards the Haitian people. You can even look it up. I can tell you that much right now. You know what? Let me do it right now. All right. Woman who wrote article on Trump. Okay. Springfield. NBC News, okay? This is straight from the source. It just exploded. Springfield woman claims she never meant to spark false rumors about Haitians. The woman behind an early Facebook post that helped spark baseless rumors about Haitians eating pets told NBC News that she feels for the immigrant community. Right? It just exploded into something I didn't mean to happen. It says it right there. But yet people are still spreading this bullshit story. It's because people are dumb. I love my country, but I hate some of the people in it because they are so stupid. They bought this hook, line, and sinker all because JD Vance and Donald Trump said it. Now, I've gone toe-to-toe against people on X. And they say, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about that? Every story that I've looked up, whether it was Dayton, Ohio, whether it was Springfield, Ohio, the mayor, the governor of Ohio, the police in those districts have said this is all nonsense. It did not happen. But guess what has happened as a result of this? Bomb threats are now being launched into schools. Children need to be evacuated. Neo-Nazis are actually going into these places looking for Haitian immigrants. This is based upon the lies that Donald Trump and JD Vance are spreading. People's pets are not being stolen. There is no context behind pictures of people picking up geese. We don't know what's going on there. But people are seeing pictures and drawing conclusions because that's what they believe in. Because they want to believe the story is true because JD Vance and Donald Trump say it. It's not true. The woman that launched this even says it sparked into something she did not mean to happen. But yet people still believe it. People, this is why it's important for you to trust but verify your information. But people are still not going to do it because you're an idiot. It's that simple. People are dumb when they don't check the information. And if you have a problem with me calling people idiots because I call it for what I see it, I don't give a damn. I stand by what I say. I'm willing to put my face and my name to my convictions. There are some people that will not. They will hide behind a keyboard and say, but this is happening because my best friend's brother's cousin's roommate lives in Springfield, Ohio, and he has seen this happen, but we don't know who this person is. It's bullshit. And now you've got armed people walking neighborhoods looking for these Haitian immigrants, people that just wanted a better life for themselves. I mean, give me your tired, give me your sick, give me your, scattered masses. I guess that just does not apply anymore.
People that came in, they're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country. And it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is the
people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking.
How is it that maybe he said that? Maybe he said, okay, why would you say something when you cannot confirm it? See, even she's looking at us like, what the fuck are you talking about? God, you're such a moron. Like, she's definitely like, this guy is a moron because he is a moron. He doesn't do any research himself. This is who Donald Trump is. This is why this debate was so essential. But yet people are still going to be dumb enough to vote for him.
This from
but
television.
The people on television saying their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond to the.
Yeah, we have found out. I just talked about the woman that says, listen, I did not mean for it to grow this level. Even she's admitted that she's lied now. How many people's lives are now in danger because of her lie?
The rest of what you've heard.
Talk about extreme.
Yeah.
you know, this is, I think, one of the reasons why in this election, I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz.
I'm not okay with Dick Cheney endorsing her. Now, here's the thing, okay? I've actually listened to Dick Cheney speak when I was stationed out of Fort Hood, Texas in 2008 before I went on my fourth deployment to Iraq. I have no respect for Dick Cheney. But the thing is that when Dick Cheney recognizes how much of a threat Donald Trump is, he's 100% correct. Liz Cheney's life was in danger because of Donald Trump's lies. I've listened to her book, Liz Cheney's book. It was a good book. And I couldn't believe that I actually found myself agreeing with her dad. I don't like Dick Cheney whatsoever. I like the fact that Jon Stewart denounced Dick Cheney still to this day. I don't think it's a great endorsement for us to have for Dick Cheney. But the fact of the matter is like Dick Cheney says that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy and our way of life and to this republic. He definitely is. Because he is willing to subvert the will of the people and the Constitution based upon a lie. This is true.
Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if he didn't make it clear already, just ask people who have worked with him. His former chief of staff, a four-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States.
And look at him shaking his head. Yep, I sure do.
His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit.
When Robert O'Brien was the national security advisor to Donald Trump, he was the fourth national security advisor, that is. When COVID took place, he told the president, he told Trump, this is going to be the national security threat of your administration. Donald Trump ignored him. And Donald Trump denies ever being told that. And how do I know this? It's because Bob Woodward, one of the most respected journalists in the history of this country, who has interviewed and has talked to presidents since Jimmy Carter, has done analysis on presidents since Richard Nixon, actually did interviews with Donald Trump. He spoke with Robert O'Brien. When he spoke to Robert O'Brien, he says, yeah, I told him on January 28th of 2020, Mr. President, this is going to be the national security challenge of your administration, because him and Matt Pottinger actually are subject matter experts in this field. Matt Pottinger is fluent in Mandarin. He understands how dangerous SARS was. But the fact of the matter is that these guys told him, listen, this is going to be a challenge. This is going to be a threat. And Donald Trump denies that conversation ever taking place. Why would he do that? It's because he does not listen to people he does not respect.
His former Secretary of Defense has said the nation, the republic, would never survive another Trump term.
And that's probably James Mattis or Mark Esper, one of those two. Like James Mattis, I've listened to James Mattis speak in person, and I can tell you that guy is phenomenal. I love James Mattis. That guy is awesome.
And when we listen to this kind of rhetoric, when the issues that affect the American people are not being addressed, I think the choice is clear in this election.
President Trump, I'll give you a quick minute to respond here.
Thank you, because when I hear that, see, I'm a different kind of a person. I fired most of those people. Not so graciously. They did bad things or a bad job. I fired them. They never fired one person. They didn't fire any.
Not true. Not true. The Biden administration did fire a kleptomaniac, a person that likes to steal. The person was actually credible when it comes down to nuclear science, because that person went to MIT for nuclear reactor science, essentially, I think is what it was. But the person was a fucking klepto, so that person got fired. So yes, the Biden administration has fired people, and people have left. There are people that have left because they did not like the way that the Biden administration has handled the situation between Israel and Palestine, which is fair. The Biden administration has not denounced these people, has not badmouthed them, has not bad-named them, has not downgraded them and degraded them. Trump has. He does that to everybody that leaves the administration. When James Mattis gave him his most polite FU to Donald Trump said he's the most overrated general in the history of the country, which is not true by a stretch of the imagination. James Mattis was one of the most respected generals, when he was in the Marine Corps. There were people that actually said that they would go to war with him any day of the week because he might have been hard, but he was fair and he was a Marine's Marine.
Anybody having to do with Afghanistan and the Taliban and the 13 people whose were just killed, viciously and violently killed, and I got to know the parents and the family, they didn't fire. They should have fired all those generals, all those top people, because that was one of the most incompetently handled situations anybody has ever seen. So when somebody does a bad job, I fire them. And
No, you fire them because they tell you no. There is a difference. Now, let's talk about the situation in Afghanistan. I can definitely say without a doubt that that was a horrendous withdrawal from Afghanistan. It went really badly. Still left. The 13 service members that died, my hearts go out to their families. But Donald Trump promoted their deaths. He definitely did. It's not because he actually gives a damn about the fallen service members, because he doesn't, okay? The fact that, and I talked about this recently in one of my shows, where he was on Section 60, his campaign actually disrespected those hollowed grounds for the sake of a photo op. Now, listen, if the parents wanted him there, the family members wanted him, that's one thing, okay? But he stood over the grave of one of the fallen service members, and he had his thumbs up, and he was smiling. That's disrespectful. He doesn't care. This should be proof enough that he does not care. All he cares about is just the photo op and the credibility it brings him. But my only question is, why didn't he do it the year before and the year before that? And I know people say, well, what about Biden? What about Harris? Why didn't they go? Well, some parents said that they weren't invited. Some people said they were. I don't know. But Donald Trump does not care about our fallen. He doesn't give a shit. He's disrespected Gold Star parents, and he's disrespected Gold Star wives. You can look it up. He's done it.
And you take a guy like Esper. He was no good. I fired him. So he writes a book. Another one writes a book. Because with me, they can write books. With nobody else can they. But they have done such a poor job. And they never fire anybody. Look at the economy. Look at the inflation. They didn't fire any of their economists. They have the same people. That's a good way not to have books written about you. But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far. In fact, I got more votes than any sitting president in history by far.
And you still lost. You still fucking lost.
Let me continue on immigration. It was what you wanted to talk about earlier, so let's get back to your deportation proposal that the vice president has reacted to as well. President Trump, you call this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. You say you would use the National Guard. You say if things get out of control, you'd have no problem using the U.S. military.
Police, yes.
You also said you would use local police. How would you deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know you believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Yeah, it is much higher because of them. They allowed criminals, many millions of criminals. They allowed terrorists. They allowed common street criminals. They allowed people to come in, drug dealers, to come into our country. And they're now in the United States and told by their countries like Venezuela, don't ever come back or we're going to kill you. Do you know that crime in Venezuela and crime in countries all over the world is way down? You know why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country.
Let's check that really quickly. All right. Okay. Crime in Venezuela compared to the U.S. We'll see how this is going. I know this stream is probably gonna take a while because I'm gonna just be fact checking my ass off. So. Crime is down in Venezuela by 67% because they're taking their gangs of criminals and depositing very nicely into the United States. He's got such shitty words. So that is false. Big surprise. I'm not going to read into it, but I'll add it to the stream description.
And this will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow. And I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes, but it's not worth it. Because they're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country. Millions of people let in. And all over the world, crime is down. All over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But
excuse me, the FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud, just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
President Trump, thank you. I'll let you respond, Vice President.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. And let's be clear where each person stands on the issue of what is important about respect for the rule of law and respect for law enforcement. The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement, 45,000 agents, get this, on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people, address what we need to do about the housing shortage, which I have a plan for, address what we must do to support our small businesses, address bringing down the price of groceries. But frankly, the American people are exhausted with this same old tired playbook.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
Excuse me. Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent, and I'm winning most of them, and I will win the.
He's not winning one of them. He has not won any of them so far. Why hasn't he fired his attorney, Alina Habba? I think I know why. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Yeah, you know. I mean, she's incompetent. He has lost his case regarding, like, the Stormy Daniels case. He's lost the case regarding, Eugene Carroll. That's 2 cases he's lost so far. He's not on a good track record right now.
Rest on appeal. And you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never
it's not.
Happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA in New York. Every one of those cases. And then they say, oh, he's a criminal. They're the ones that made them go after me. By the way, Joe Biden was found essentially guilty on the documents case. And what happened?
No, it wasn't.
In my documents case, they said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete and total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they used it, and it's never happened in this country. They used it to try and win an election. They're fake cases.
President Trump, thank you.
They're not fake cases. You're just a fake person. That's simple.
A really quick response here, Vice President Harris, on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again. Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guardrails, because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him. It's up to the American people.
Vice President.
And here's the thing. Here's the amazing thing about that whole concept right there. When people say, if Donald Trump wanted to be a dictator, why did he do it the first time around? It's because he had those guardrails, people that would tell him no. He's made it abundantly clear. He's only going to hire people that will tell him, yes, Mr. President. We will do whatever you want to say, Mr. President. That's exactly the kind of people that we're talking about here. They are not going to stop him. They are not going to prevent him. They will just say, yes, Mr. President, we will do whatever you want to do so. He's already talked about how he's going to go after his political adversaries. He's going to retaliate. He says, I will be wrecked. He said all these things. This is not the kind of person I would want to run for office. This is not the kind of person. This is what a dictator sounds like. This is what an autocrat sounds like. He's already said that he's going to be a dictator. I don't care for how long. Dictators never relinquish power. It's that simple. He almost tried to get away with not relinquishing power. And he did say in a tweet on X, he says, fraud of this magnitude requires can lead to the termination of the Constitution. Now, when it comes down to immunity, okay, this is only immunity in the scope of your duties. Jobs that, like, decisions you make that are within the scope of your duties. Sending in fake electors is not in the scope of your duties. That's against the law.
Stop
Harris,
him.
Thank you. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president.
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about.
His ear looks really good, doesn't it? He doesn't look wounded whatsoever. I mean, listen, I know what happened that day. The assassination on his life is denounced completely. He never should have had an attempt on his life. I definitely say that. The fireman that lost his life is a horrible thing. I'm really sorry that he lost his life. My condolences to his families. But, you know,
Democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy with a fake Russia investigation that went nowhere.
We have a lot to get to. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
So my values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss at least every point that you've made. But in particular, let's talk about fracking because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States. And in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking. My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history because of an approach that recognizes that we cannot over-rely on foreign oil. As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who worked and saved and was able to buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times, is a value that I bring to my work to say we are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increased by 3 million homes by the end of my first term. My work that is related to having a friend when I was in high school who was sexually assaulted by her stepfather. And my focus then on protecting women and children from violent crime is based on a value that is deeply grounded in the importance of standing up for those who are most vulnerable. My work that is about protecting Social Security and Medicare is based on long-standing work that I have done, protecting seniors from scams. My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down and name-calling. The true measure of the leader is the leader who actually understands the strength is not in beating people down, it's in lifting people up. I intend to be that president.
President Trump, your response?
First of all, I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder.
He was given $400 million. It's actually been proven. It was not like a lump sum of $400 million. It was over a period of time because all of his casinos essentially failed, and his dad was actually prosecuted and it was actually held liable or held to account by the New Jersey Gaming Commission because they were always going in and buying chips to help him with his casinos because he's a shitty businessman. His casinos pretty much all failed, and his dad did loan him a shit ton of money. Now listen, okay, his dad was a very wealthy guy. He had his fixer, Roy Cohn, who Donald Trump always loves Roy Cohn. He likes to reference Roy Cohn because of his ties to the mafia and whatnot. But the thing is Donald Trump actually did receive a great deal of money, and he was able to build an empire off of it. Was it a good empire? No, it wasn't, actually. As a matter of fact, there are people that say this guy was horrible to work for. There are contractors that say he still hasn't paid us for the work that we did for him. He's great at marketing himself. He's great at marketing his name.
In Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him, but I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. Fracking, she's been against it for 12 years. Defund the police, she's been against that forever. She gave all that stuff up very wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar?
Does he really think that was an own? It was terrible. My God, what such a cringe person. See, look, she's even laughing at him. It's like, look at that look on her face. She's cracking up right now. I love it.
She went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail.
That's actually not what happened, though. What actually happened was she was talking about people that were non-violent offenders, people that did not commit those crimes, essentially. That's the people that she was talking about. She was very, very specific about that, actually.
She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. Just to finish one thing, so important in my opinion. So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before. When they took over, they got rid of it, started getting rid of it, and the prices were going up the roof. They immediately let these guys go to where they were. I would have been 5 times, 4 times, 5 times higher, because you're talking about 3.5 years ago. They got it up to where I was because they had no choice, because the prices of energy were quadrupling and doubling. You saw what happened to gasoline. So they said, let's go back to Trump. But if she won the election, the day after that election, they'll go back to destroying our country, and oil will be dead. Fossil fuel will be dead. We'll go back to windmills, and we'll go back to solar, where they need a whole desert to get some energy to come out.
Okay, so here, okay, I'm going to play the video by Mr. Global, okay? Because you have to see this video, okay? So this is Mr. Global. He also has a TikTok channel. I highly recommend people go to follow him on TikTok if you haven't done so already. But he's going to explain the whole price of oil, okay?
So I got this question and I would like to address it. How much of a president's policy affects the global markets when it comes to oil and gas? So historically speaking, a president's policy, it is very rare for a president's policy to have any type of impact on the global market, historically speaking. Now, the Shale Revolution had an impact on the global market, but that didn't come from a policy. Probably the biggest change that had an impact on global markets during our lifetime was when the United States lifted the oil export ban in 2015. That had a huge impact on the global market. And it triggered the largest oil crash in history, because OPEC was not happy that we were going to take all that market share. But that was something that was passed by Congress. Obama was opposed to it. The Republicans gave him some stuff on renewables, so he signed it. Another thing it did is it made our oil much more available to the global market and increased the value of it. For whatever reason, the hyperbole of politics may make people think that normal everyday presidential policy impacts global markets and gas prices. It really doesn't. The word regulations is a 4-letter word that gets thrown around a lot.
That's true. People don't understand that regulations are necessary. Regulations are put in place for a reason.
Doesn't really impact prices, although it does in California, but that's because they've got an enormous amount of regulations.
There's a delay on here.
Far beyond anything we've seen on a national scale, and still wouldn't impact the global market. Obama approved the Keystone Pipeline, didn't impact the global market. Biden killed the Keystone XL, didn't impact the global market. Neither of those things impacted gas prices either. These things just aren't big enough to impact the global market. They're not big enough to impact global pricing, and they're not big enough to impact gas prices in the United States. There's sort of an unwritten rule, and that is you don't mess with the global oil markets. That is an unwritten rule, and the reason you don't mess with them is because it's kind of like Back to the Future. You fuck around in the global markets, and shit's going to happen down the road that you don't see coming. And that is why, under the Trump and Biden administrations, we have seen 3 things impact global markets. But had the first thing never occurred, the second and third thing would have never occurred either. It was a domino effect. So this is the first presidential action that I can think of in my lifetime that actually had an impact on global markets. When Donald Trump got OPEC to flood the world with oil.
This is really important that people need to watch this stuff, okay? Now, I've always said that presidents have very little impact on the global market when it comes down to oil. But this guy brings the receipts.
And bring it crashing down. That wasn't some congressional thing. That was President Trump. And what was really crazy about it was oil prices weren't high at all. Gas prices weren't high at all. Why are you crashing a market that is running beautifully? Didn't have high prices. Why would you crash that market? Had this never happened, then the OPEC 2020 deal would have never happened. Because when you double cross oil cartels, they never forget, and they will get their revenge. And that's exactly what they did. So the first major policy that impacted global, markets was Trump getting OPEC to flood the market. The second one was OPEC's revenge on Donald Trump, which he fell for and agreed to. A 2-year, 10% production cut that led to the highest gas prices in history? Yeah. If the first deal never happened, this deal wouldn't have happened. And if this deal never happened, then this deal would have never happened when Joe Biden sold 180 million barrels of oil out of the strategic reserve. Now, this oil still would have been sold, but it would have been sold in 6 months. It would have been sold over a period of years, all the way out to 2027. But because of this, which occurred because of this then we had to do this. There's a theme in all of these things. The word unprecedented. Yeah, unprecedented. This is historic, but the word unprecedented appears several times in the article. Yeah. So what I'm saying is it takes things that are historic or unprecedented or extremely rare and big to actually impact the global markets. Not some regulations, not some stupid pipeline, not a temporary pause on new leases. So no, the everyday, mundane, day-to-day policies, whether they're pro-oil or anti-oil, don't have an impact on global markets. It is the historic and unprecedented things that have never happened before that have those impacts. The idea that some company that makes $50 billion a year gives a shit about some regulations is just ridiculous. It really is. What are you going to not go make your $50 billion a year because of some regulation? Give me a break.
He's 100% accurate. I mean, this is why it's really important that people do their research on this. You can't just say, oh, well, you know, it's because of regulations. No, it's not. It's not regulations. Regulations aren't the reason for this.
You ever see a solar plant? By the way, I'm a big fan of solar, but they take 400, 500 acres of desert soil.
Trump, we have a
These
lot
are
of
not good
issues
things
that
for
we
the
have to get
environment
to.
that she
We're out of time.
understands.
Thank you.
The desert he's talking about is like places like Dubai. They don't put it in the desert. They put them over parking lots, and that's actually how they use solar power. It's actually ingenious.
Lindsay, thank you. We have an election in just 56 days. And I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which, of course, we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on. Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer.
She was not shot by an out-of-control police officer. He followed the rules of engagement, and she failed to listen, okay? I don't care what anybody says, okay? Ashley Babbitt was not a patriot. I don't care what anybody fucking says. I have no sympathy for her whatsoever. She was not there to ask for a cup of sugar. Officer Byrd told her, do not cross that barrier, and she chose not to listen. He had his gun out. She chose not to listen. That is escalation of force by the damn book. And people eventually died of suicide. One guy, Officer Sicknick, died of a stroke. A woman was trampled on that day, and he sat there for nearly 4 hours and did nothing.
That should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace. But we didn't do this group of people that have been treated so badly. I ask, what about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people? That she
bringing up immigration again. We're not talking about immigration anymore. We're talking about January 6th, but he cannot stay on topic. He cannot answer the question.
Deported. She was the border czar. Remember that. She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said at the beginning, oh, I'm surprised you're not talking about the border yet. That's because she knows what a bad job they've done. What about those people? When are they going to be prosecuted?
Whataboutism. That's all Donald Trump does. Is he does the whataboutism game, and he is failing. He is floundering. He is all over the place.
When are these people from countries all over the world, not just South America? They're coming in from all over the world, David, all over the world, and crime rates are down all over the world because of it. But when are those, David, when are those people going to be prosecuted? When are the people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted, or in Seattle?
They have been prosecuted. The people have been arrested for the BLM riots, and they have been prosecuted for the crimes that they committed, actually. The people that haven't been prosecuted are people that did not commit the crimes themselves.
They went into Seattle. They took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
But let me just ask you.
You might ask her that question.
You were the president. You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes or no?
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech.
He is such a coward. He is such a coward. He stoked the flames by saying, yes, they are stealing the election. They are stealing the election, inciting the base, saying that if you do not show your strength, you're going to lose your country. And then Rudy Giuliani came out and says, trial by combat. He is such a coward. This is proof that he does not give a shit about his supporters. People have literally gone to prison for him, and he does not care about them.
I said, I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, you know, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or so.
Mark Milley and Mark Esper has all said that this is not true. There was no such memo. There was no such order put in place.
Soldiers, they rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me. It was just 2 weeks ago. Her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of.
No, she says we are responsible for what happens today. That doesn't mean she is solely responsible, you fucking moron.
That tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi, but I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the president of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died. And understand, the former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason. But this is not an isolated situation. Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a...
I really wish you didn't bring up Charlottesville, because we've pretty much killed this issue. We've beaten it with a dead horse, okay? What happened at Charlottesville was absolutely horrendous. That Nazi that ran that Heather Heyer down was a monster, and I'm glad he's spending the rest of his life in prison. But this whole concept of him saying very fine people on both sides, he did shortly afterwards say, I denounce white supremacy. But, you know, that it doesn't really matter, because then he had Nick Fuentes at Mar-a-Lago recently, and he says, I like this guy, he gets me, kind of deal. So I take that with a grain of salt. When he's been asked to denounce David Duke, he says, I denounced David Duke. But then when he was asked again, it's like, why would I denounce him? I barely know the guy. He just cannot keep he cannot keep a coherent answer together.
Mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side. Let's remember
but he did say that
when it came to the Proud Boys, a militia, the former president said, stand back and stand by.
He did say stand back and stand by, and he's trying to deny it.
So for everyone...
He's shaking his head, but he did say it in the presidential debate against Joe Biden in 2020. He says, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. And you know what they took that as? They took that as a sign to get ready for Donald Trump.
Watching who remembers what January 6th was, I say, we don't have to go back. Let's not go back. We're not going back. It's time to turn the page. And if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you to stand for country, to stand for our democracy, to stand for rule of law, and to end the chaos, and to end the approach that is about attacking the foundations of our democracy because you don't like the outcome. And be clear on that point. Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath. If this and the outcome...
The bloodbath was talking about manufacturing jobs. I want to be very clear about that. It was talking about bloodbath as far as, like, you know, people taking advantage of us, like financially in the manufacturing market and the auto industry. That's what he was talking about for the bloodbath bit, okay? I've done the research on that, and I'm just being as objective as possible. But, you know, Donald Trump, he likes to use incendiary remarks because he knows it's going to get his base excited. Because even his own base doesn't understand what he means by bloodbath.
Of this election is not to his liking. Let's turn the page on this. Let's not go back. Let's chart a course for the future and not go backwards to the past.
Let me just follow up here.
It was a different term, and it was a term that related to energy because they have destroyed our energy business. That was where bloodbath was. Also, on Charlottesville, that story has been, as you would say, debunked. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Jesse...
People that kiss your ass, yeah.
All of these people, they covered it. If they go an extra sentence, they will see it was perfect. It was debunked in almost every newspaper, but they still bring it up, just like they bring 2025 up. They bring all of this stuff up. I ask you this. You talk about the Capitol. Why are we allowing these millions of people to come through on the southern border? How come she's not doing anything? And I'll tell you what I would do, and I would be very proud to do it. I would say we would both leave this debate right now. I'd like to see her go down to Washington, D.C. during this debate, because we're wasting a lot of time. Go down to, because she's been so bad, it's so ridiculous. Go down to Washington, D.C. and let her sign a bill to close up the border, because they have the right to do it. They don't need bills. They have the right to do it. The president of the United States, you'll get him out of bed, you'll wake him up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you'll say, come on down to the office, let's sign a bill. If he signs a bill that the border is closed, all he has to do is say it to the Border Patrol, who are phenomenal. If they do that, the border is closed. Those people are killing many people, unlike J6.
We talked immigration here tonight. I do want to focus on this next issue to both of you, because it really brings us this into focus, truth in these times that we're living in. Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now...
You did say that.
Acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge it at all. I said that sarcastically. You know that. It was.
I love how he's backtracking now because he's afraid of losing support from people that believe in him. He lost the election, but he does not want to admit that he lost the election. It's because he's a coward. He doesn't like to admit when he loses. Just like he said he didn't lose this debate when he got absolutely demolished in this debate. Like, you've seen him coming apart at the scenes. Look at that face. I mean, look at this guy. This guy got demolished in this debate. It's not even close.
Oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it. And they should have sent it back to the legislatures for approval. I got almost 75 million votes, the most votes any sitting president
There's no proof that you won the election. There's plenty of proof that you lost the election.
ever gotten. I was told if I got 63, which was what I got in 2016, you can't be beaten. The election, people should never be thinking about it. An election is fraudulent. We need two things. We need walls, and we have to have it. We have to have borders, and we have to have good elections. Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm, lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them
No judge
Republican,
looked at it.
and said
They said
no
we didn't have standing. That's the other thing. They said we didn't have standing, a technicality. Can you imagine a system where a person in an election doesn't have standing? The president of the United States doesn't have standing. That's how we lost. If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you'll do a special on it. I'll show you Georgia.
You've had plenty of time. You've had almost 4 years to show proof of that you won the election, but you've not produced jack diddly squat. Your buddy Mike Lindell has not provided any evidence. True to the Vote has not provided any evidence. 2,000 Mules has been proven to be a disaster and based on lies. They actually had to prove that in a court of law that it was based upon lies. There's a reason why you guys have lost all your cases, because you lost the election. You lost. It's time for you to admit it, but you won't admit it because you're too proud to admit that you lost.
And I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you. We have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter because we have to solve the problem that we have right now. That's old news. And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that he lost by whisker. So he still believes he did not lose the election that was won by President Biden and yourself. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks away. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that. But we cannot afford to have a president of the United States who attempts, as he did in the past, to upend the will of the voters in a free and fair election. And I'm going to tell you that I have traveled the world as Vice President of the United States, and world leaders are laughing at Donald Trump. I have talked with military leaders, some of whom worked with you, and they say you're a disgrace. And when you then talk in this way in a presidential debate and deny what over and over again are court cases you have lost because you did, in fact, lose that election, it leads one to believe that perhaps we do not have in the candidate to my right the temperament or the ability to not be confused about fact. That's deeply troubling.
And he still hasn't bothered looking at her. She keeps looking at him, but he doesn't look at her because he knows that she's right.
The American people deserve better.
I'll give you 1 minute to respond, Mr. President.
Let me just say about world leaders. Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men. They call him.
He's not the one of the most respected. He's a dictator. He's an authoritarian. He's an autocrat.
A strong man. He's a tough person. Smart. Prime Minister of Hungary. They said, why is the whole world blowing up? 3 years ago, it wasn't. Why is it blowing up? He said, because you need Trump back as president. They were afraid of him. China was afraid, and I don't like to use the word afraid, but I'm just quoting him. China was afraid of him. North Korea was afraid of him. Look at what's going on with North Korea, by the way. He said Russia was afraid of him.
North Korea is not afraid of Donald Trump. They never have been. Kim Jong-un was, he loved, all you got to do is flatter Donald Trump, and he's on board. All you got to do is just kiss Donald Trump's ass, and he is on board with you.
I ended the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and Biden put it back on day one, but he ended the XL pipeline. The XL pipeline in our country, he ended that, but he let the Russians.
And I've already showed a video about the Keystone XL pipeline.
Build a pipeline going all over Europe and heading into Germany, the biggest pipeline in the world. Look, Viktor Orban said it. He said the most respected, most feared person is Donald Trump. We had no problems when Trump was president. But when this weak, pathetic man that you saw at a debate just a few months ago, that if he weren't in that debate, he'd be running instead of her. She got no votes. He got 14 million votes. What you did, you talk about a threat to democracy. He got 14 million votes, and they threw him out of office. And you know what? I'll give you a little secret. He hates her. He can't stand her.
No proof of that whatsoever. Listen, Joe Biden realized that he probably wasn't going to win the election because of his debate performance. His popularity was decreasing because of his age. His policies have been overwhelmingly popular, but his age is the biggest factor. He did something that was very selfless. He put his ego aside, his pride aside, and said, you know what, maybe it's time for me to step aside. And the American people and the Democratic people love him for that. Because a lot of us were concerned. Yes, we were still going to vote for Joe Biden. Mostly because, we feel like he's done a better job. He's just not overwhelmingly popular simply because of his age. But Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. He doesn't care about democracy. He doesn't care about the Republic. He doesn't care about anybody but himself. He stepped aside, but Joe Biden stepped aside because he realized that this is bigger than him. He wasn't fired. The people didn't cut him loose. They just said, you should probably step aside. And he decided, you know what? Maybe I should. If Donald Trump was asked to be step aside, do you think he would? No. His ego is far too powerful. He wants people to love him. He needs it. Because the second that everybody, his entire base, turns against Donald Trump, that would pretty much be the end of him. Because he would not be able to handle it. He needs to be loved. He needs to be respected. He needs your money. That's all he cares about. He doesn't care about anything else. He just wants your love, he wants your loyalty, and he wants your money.
But he got 14 million votes. They threw him out. She got 0 votes. And when she ran, she was the first one to leave because she failed. And now she's running. I don't understand it, but I'm okay with it because
your time is
I think we're going to do very well.
We've got a lot more to get to.
Turning now to the Israel-Hamas war and the hostages.
This was the hardest part of the debate for both of them, honestly, especially for Kamala Harris.
Still being held, Americans among them. Vice President Harris, in December, you said, quote, Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added, quote, it matters how, saying international humanitarian law must be respected. Israel must do more to protect innocent civilians. You said that 9 months ago. Now an estimated 40,000 Palestinians are dead. Nearly 100 hostages remain. Just last week, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there's not a deal in the making. President Biden has not been able to break through the stalemate. How would you do it?
Well, let's understand how we got here. On October 7, Hamas, a terrorist organization, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis. Many of them young people who were simply attending a concert. Women were horribly raped. And so absolutely, I said then, I say now, Israel has a right to defend itself. We would. And how it does so matters. Because it is also true, far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end. It must end immediately, and the way it will end is we need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that. Work around the clock, also understanding that we must chart a course for a two-state solution. And in that solution, there must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians. But the one thing I will assure you always, I will always give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran, and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
President Trump, how would you negotiate with Netanyahu and also Hamas in order to get the hostages out and prevent the killing of more innocent civilians in Gaza?
If I were president, it would have never started. If I were president, Russia would have never, ever, I know Putin very well, he would have never, and there was no threat of it either, by the way, for 4 years, have gone into Ukraine and killed millions of people when you add it up, far worse than people understand what's going on over there. But when she mentions about Israel, all of a sudden, she hates Israel. She wouldn't even meet with Netanyahu when he went to Congress to make a very important speech. She refused to be there because she was at a sorority party of hers. She wanted to go to the sorority party. She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. And I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population.
Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. She hates Israel and she hates the Arab population, right? She just seems to hate absolutely everybody, right? Is that what you're trying to tell us, Donald Trump? Yeah, what a crock of shit.
Because the whole place is going to get blown up. Arabs, Jewish people, Israel will be gone. It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had. Iran had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the 28 different spheres of terror. And they are spheres of terror, horrible terror. They had no money. It was a big story, and you know it. You covered it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Now they're a rich nation. And now what they're doing is they're spreading that money around. Look at what's happening with the Houthis and Yemen. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. This would have never happened. I will get that settled and fast, and I'll get the war.
Okay, everybody needs to understand something. The war between the Saudis and the Yemenis, and the Houthis especially, was happening in his administration. As a matter of fact, he actually condoned the actions of the Saudis. Why? Because they're allies, allies of ours. When Jamal Khashoggi was executed by the Saudis at the embassy in Turkey, he didn't denounce it. As a matter of fact, he passed off all knowledge and responsibility, but he backed up MBS, essentially. But the Yemenis and the Saudis have been at war with each other since 2015. When he was in office, he did nothing. He actually supplied the weapons for this. So once again, he is lying.
With Ukraine and Russia ended, if I'm president-elect, I'll get it done before even becoming
How? How are you going to get it done? You still haven't given an answer how you're going to get that shit done, okay? Because you don't have a plan for it. You probably have a concept of a plan, just like you're going to say for healthcare. You don't have a plan, you have a concept for a plan. What you're probably going to end up doing is you're going to tell Zelensky to give it up because we're not going to provide you any more aid anymore. And then you're going to tell Putin, just do whatever the fuck you want to. That's exactly how you're going to do it.
Coming president.
Vice President Harris, he says you hate Israel.
That's absolutely not true. I have my entire career and life supported Israel and the Israeli people. He knows that. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality, which is it is very well known that Donald Trump is weak and wrong on national security and foreign policy. It is well known that he admires dictators, wants to be a dictator on day one, according to himself. It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the hell he wants and go into Ukraine. It is well known that he said when Russia went into Ukraine, it was brilliant. It is well known he exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un. And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear. They can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on national security, including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
They're the ones, and she's the one that caused it, that's weak on national security by allowing every nation last month for the year, 168 different countries sending people into our country. Their crime rates are way down. Putin endorsed her last week, said, I hope she wins. And I think
Let's talk about the endorsement of Vladimir Putin to Kamala Harris. Does anybody actually believe for 1 second that he actually fully endorses her? Somebody that supports Ukraine when Donald Trump does not? No. Putin pretty much said it probably because Donald Trump wanted him to. Okay? Because Kamala Harris has made it abundantly clear she's going to back Ukraine. Trump said he is not going to back Ukraine. Putin likes Donald Trump. Why? Because Donald Trump loves him some Putin. He definitely loves him some Putin. He's made that abundantly clear. He's not hard on Putin. He's hard on the Russian people. That's with all the sanctions. Sanctions don't hurt Putin. They hurt the Russian people. Because then Putin says, look what the Americans are doing to us. It's a crock of shit.
I think he meant it because what he's gotten away with is absolutely incredible. It wouldn't have happened with me. The leaders of other countries think that they're weak and incompetent, and they are. They're grossly incompetent. And I just ask one question. Why does Biden go in and kill the Keystone Pipeline and approve the single biggest deal that Russia's ever made?
I already addressed that, so he's wrong again.
Nord Stream 2, the biggest pipeline anywhere in the world going to Germany and all over Europe because they're weak and they're ineffective. And Biden, by the way,
President
gets paid
Trump,
a lot of money.
Thank you. We have a lot of issues to get to.
We'll be right back with much more of this historic ABC News presidential debate from the National.
Okay, so basically that's like the first break of things. And I'm just kind of like, just got to talk about it real quick. So far, this whole debate, she's pretty much eaten his lunch. There's like no other way to look at it. She has pretty much skull crushed him. Like there's no other way to look at it. He has done terribly in this debate. He doesn't answer questions directly. All he says is, I will get this done, but he doesn't say how. He doesn't have any real plans. He doesn't formulate any real plans. Donald Trump is full of it, but he's always has been full of it. But yet people will still vote for him simply because they like what he says. He says what we're all thinking. What exactly are you all thinking? Are you thinking about Hannibal Lecter? Are you thinking about sharks and batteries? Are you thinking about poisoning the blood of this nation? What are you thinking about, essentially? Donald Trump could not stay on topic for 1 second because you could talk about why is the sky blue and he will still find a way to talk about immigration. Why? Because he has no other talking point. Now, do I think that she could have answered questions more directly? 100% she could have. And I definitely think, well, I know they're not going to do another debate, but I get why she does her answers is because she's trying to be relatable. Because the thing is, she is more relatable than Donald Trump. Because it's funny, because J.D. Vance talks about how Taylor Swift endorses Kamala Harris, and J.D. Vance was like, well, nobody should take that seriously because Taylor Swift is a billionaire. She is, you know, she has no connection to the regular people. This is from the same guy that's getting endorsements from Peter Thiel. This is the same guy whose running mate is Donald Trump. You mean these guys have a relation to the common American? Donald Trump definitely does not have a connection to the common American man. He has never, ever had to worry about the same things that you and I have had to worry about. Has Donald Trump ever driven a car? Not a golf cart, a car. Has he ever actually driven a car? Has he ever actually had a job where he actually had to bust a sweat every so often? Did he ever actually have a job where he actually had to, did he ever actually do something, effective, essentially? I mean, how is it Donald Trump can relate to the common man? We know for a fact he didn't raise any of his children. We know for a fact that, he didn't actually do any of those things. We do know that Donald Trump is, has committed infidelity. We know that he's committed fraud. We know that he has ripped people off. We know that he has sent his attack dog, Roger Stone, to go attack Native American casinos by spreading lies about them, saying that they are trafficking cigarettes and stuff like that, which isn't true. Donald Trump has a history of corruption, but yet people will still vote for him because he says what we are all thinking. I'm not thinking any of the stuff that he says, but people will still vote for him because this is they're exposing themselves for who they are. Now listen, there are people that I know that are going to vote for Donald Trump. Some of them I know as good, decent Americans. Some of them don't like Joe Biden. A lot of them don't like Kamala Harris. Okay, that's fair. And some of them are good people. They are good Americans. I respect them. I respect their beliefs. I disagree with them, but I respect their beliefs. The only time I cross that line is when those beliefs are about human rights. If you believe, like, for example, members of the LGBTQ plus community are freaks of nature and they should not exist, you're going to have a problem with me. If you actually believe that, like, you know, that Haitians or immigrants are eating cats and dogs and pets and whatnot, we're definitely going to have a disagreement. If you believe that healthcare is not a right, which I do believe, I used to not believe that, but I've read the evidence, I've seen the reports, it is a human right. Because for a country that spends so much on healthcare, we sure do have the worst healthcare across the planet. It is true. Yes, wealthy people come to this country all the time to get better healthcare. That's because they can afford that healthcare. The average American citizen cannot afford healthcare. Thank God I got TRICARE for my years of military service. But not everybody has the same things that I do. Now, there needs to be a severe overhaul. More accountability, better doctors, better hospitals. Not just like in the affluent areas, but in areas like where low-income people are. But people won't do that. It's very extensive. It's because infrastructure is not exactly at the forefront of our mind until this administration. The most extensive infrastructure package since Eisenhower. This is all true. Anyway, let's get back to it.
To this historic ABC News presidential debate tonight. We're going to continue here, and I want to turn to the war in Ukraine. We're now 2.5 years into this conflict. Mr. President, it has been the position of the Biden administration that we must defend Ukraine from Russia, from Vladimir Putin, to defend their sovereignty, their democracy, that it's in America's best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. You said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly...
Why can't he ask the question whether he wants Ukraine or Russia to win? That's answer enough.
People being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for $250 billion or more because they don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are. They're in for $150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars.
NATO has been contributing. He's wrong again.
I said, either you pay up or we're not going to protect you anymore. So that's maybe one of the reasons they don't like me as much as they like weak people. But you take a look at what's happening. We're in for 250 to 275 billion. They're into 100 to 150. They should be forced to equalize. With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason? He hasn't even made a phone call in 2 years to Putin, hasn't spoken to anybody. They don't even try and get it. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president.
How? He has no plan.
If I win, when I'm president-elect, and what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together, that war would have never happened. And in fact, when I saw Putin after I left, unfortunately left because our country has gone to hell, but after I left, when I saw him building up soldiers, he did it after I left, I said, oh, he must be negotiating. It must be a good, strong point of negotiation. Well, it wasn't, because Biden had no idea how to talk to him. He had no idea how to stop it. And now you have millions of people dead, and it's only getting worse, and it could lead to World War III. Don't kid yourself, David. We're playing with World War III, and we have a president that we don't even know if he's... Where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify
they threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? But we have a president, that doesn't know he's alive.
Your time is up. Just to clarify in the question, do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
That's not an answer. That is so not an answer, honestly. It's because we know that he likes Putin more than he likes Zelensky.
Negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
I want to take this to Vice President Harris. I want to get your thoughts on support for Ukraine in this moment, but also, as Commander-in-Chief, if elected, how would you deal with Vladimir Putin, and would it be any different from what we're seeing from President Biden?
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president, you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up. And that's not who we are as Americans. Let's understand what happened here. I actually met with Zelensky a few days before Russia invaded, tried through force to change territorial boundaries, to defy one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I met with President Zelensky. I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank, to Poland and Romania. And through the work that I and others did, we brought 50 countries together to support Ukraine in its righteous defense. And because of our support, because of the air defense, the ammunition, the artillery, the javelins, the Abrams tanks that we have provided, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country. If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. And understand what that would mean, because Putin's agenda is not just about Ukraine. Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president, and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Yep, I love how she just hit that home, because she's trying to make it relatable for the people that actually do live in this country, the Polish citizens, especially in Pennsylvania, but across the country as well. It's 100% true. It's good that Putin has been held in Ukraine, and it's good that we support the Ukrainian people, because if we abandon them today, all the money we've given them would be for naught. Let alone the fact that then this might embolden Putin to try to spread his influence. Had we done nothing, Biden would be looked at as weak. We'd be looked at as like, oh my God, we just let a guy that's an ally of ours get invaded, and we've done nothing to support them. That's exactly what the conservative base would have done. That's what Donald Trump would have done. He said, I would have defended Zelensky. I would have sent him aid. I would have sent the 82nd Airborne. I would have sent it. That's exactly what Trump would have done, essentially. The fact of the matter is because NATO united with Ukraine, sent them aid, sent them weapons, sent them arms and whatnot, and we've supported Ukraine. Had we not done that, Putin would have been emboldened and probably wanted to invade to other countries. I mean, that's exactly what, if I was Putin, that's exactly the way I would take it too.
Vice President Harris, thank you. We've heard from both of you on Ukraine tonight. Afghanistan came up in the last hour. I wanted her to respond to something you said earlier, and I'll give you a minute here.
Putin would be sitting in Moscow, and he wouldn't have lost 300,000 men and women, but he would have been sitting in Moscow. Quiet, please. He would have been sitting in Moscow, much happier than he is right now. But eventually, he's got a thing that other people don't have. He's got nuclear weapons. They don't ever talk about that. He's got nuclear weapons. Nobody ever thinks about that. And eventually, maybe he'll use them, and maybe he hasn't been that threatening, but he does have that. Something we don't even like to talk about. Nobody likes to talk about it. But just so you understand, they sent her to negotiate peace before this war started. 3 days later, he went in and he started the war, because everything they said was weak and stupid. They said the wrong things. That war should have never started. She was the emissary. They sent her in to negotiate with Zelensky and Putin. And she did. And the war started 3 days later. And that's the kind of talent we have with her. She's worse than Biden. In my opinion, I think he's the worst president in the history of our country. She goes down as the worst vice president in the history of our country. But let me tell you something. She is a horrible negotiator. They sent her in to negotiate. As soon as they left, Putin did the invasion.
President Trump, thank you. You did bring up something. You said she went to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. Vice President Harris, have you ever met Vladimir Putin? Can you clarify tonight?
Yet again, I said at the beginning of this debate, you're going to hear a bunch of lies coming from this fellow. And that is another one. When I went to meet with President Zelensky, it has been about standing as America always should. As a leader upholding international rules and norms, as a leader who shows strength, understanding that the alliances we have around the world are dependent on our ability to look out for our friends and not favor our enemies because you adore strongmen instead of caring about democracy. And that is very much what is at stake here. The President of the United States is commander-in-chief, and the American people have a right to rely on a president who understands the significance of America's role and responsibility in terms of ensuring that there is stability and ensuring we stand up for our principles and not sell them for the benefit of personal flattery.
We've talked about Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. I do want to talk about Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of this debate. I wanted to move on to Afghanistan.
Said Trump did the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He got these countries, the 28 countries at the time, to pay up. He said, I've never seen. He's the head of NATO. He said, I've never seen. For years, we were paying almost all of NATO. We were being ripped off by European nations, both on trade and on NATO. I got them to pay up by saying one of the statements you made before, if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you. Otherwise, we would have never gotten it. He said it was one of the most incredible jobs that he's ever seen done.
Thank you. I want to turn to Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of the debate, and we witnessed a poignant moment today on Capitol Hill, honoring the soldiers who died in the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I do want to ask the Vice President, do you believe you bear any responsibility in the way that...
Now, I really wish she would have answered this honestly. I mean, she does give a good answer, but I'll talk about it in a second.
That withdrawal played out?
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan. 4 presidents said they would, and Joe Biden did. And as a result, America's taxpayers are not paying the $300 million a day we were paying for that endless war. And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world the first time this century. But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released. And get this, get this. And the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David, a place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president, as...
So here's the funny part about it. She was asked at one point, what's her favorite insult? And she said, I can't say it. But basically, it begins with an M and ends with an So basically, she was going to say, this motherfucker here. Like, you could just tell. She just wanted to say, this motherfucker here.
President invited them to Camp David because he does not, again, appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States to be commander-in-chief with a level of respect. And this gets back to the point of how he has consistently disparaged and demeaned members of our military, fallen soldiers, and the work that we must do to uphold the strength and the respect of the United States of America around the world.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
So here's what I think she should have definitely answered it, though. At the end of the day, she and President Biden were in the White House when the Afghanistan withdrawal took place. When you are in that position, decisions made, whether they were before you, if they happen on your administration, you still have to be able to take the responsibility because you still follow through with the decision. 13 service members died. It was probably a death, 13 deaths that never should have happened. There are probably many examples where we could bring that up. The fact of the matter is, I don't like it when people politicize it. I don't like the fact that when people like to shift blame about like which president is responsible for what. I don't like doing that because I feel like it degrades the sacrifice that our fallen have made. But here's the thing. She definitely should have said, yes, I agree with the fact that we should have withdrawn from Afghanistan. We don't know if it would have been better under Trump. I doubt it. Because Trump wouldn't have gone the extra mile like the administration did here. The $80 billion that was left, or the $85 billion that was left, that was accrued over a period of 20 years. And this is equipment like whatever we couldn't take back, they tried destroying it. A lot of it was meant for the Afghan army and the police. But because some of them abandoned it, because their president abandoned the country, why would anybody else want to fight for it? If the president's not willing to stand like Zelensky's doing in Ukraine, why should anybody say then? But here's the thing, and I say this again. Back in the 80s, during the hostage crisis, or like the 79-80 time frame, when the hostage crisis in Iran took place, they were initially going to send a special forces team to recover the hostages from Tehran. They called off the mission. Jimmy Carter called off the mission, and on their return trip back, a helicopter malfunction took place. Lives were lost. Jimmy Carter said, I made the call. The fault lies with me. Now, Biden did say, the buck stops with me. But pretty much like has gone back to saying, oh, well, you know, this is a plan set in motion by Trump, which is true. This was a plan set in motion by Trump, and we had to agree to it because if we didn't, the Taliban would renege out, and then they would basically start attacking our forces again. And that would have been really even worse on Biden's part. When you're in the hot seat, whether you're president or vice president, when it comes down to it, you gotta swallow that bitter pill. Yes, it was our call to make. We followed through with it. And it's not a pretty pill to swallow. I'm telling you, it's not. But you can't take credit for something and not take responsibility. I'm always critical of Trump for that regard. He never ever takes responsibility, but he always takes all the credit. It's that simple. If you're gonna take responsibility, if you're gonna accept responsibility, and if you're gonna take credit for something you do, you also have to be willing to take the responsibility when things go awry. It just is what it is. We have to call it for what it is. I'm trying to be as fair as I possibly can. But honestly, like I said, I don't think there was a better way for us to get out of there. There might have been, but I don't know what. Trump says, oh, I wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have done that. Listen, We already saw what Trump did when we started withdrawing out of Syria. We abandoned our Kurdish allies, people that were helping us fight against ISIS. They were spotting targets, and we abandoned them. How would it have been any different here with Donald Trump?
President Trump, your response to her saying that you began the negotiations with the Taliban.
So if you take a look at that period of time, the Taliban was killing our soldiers, a lot of them, with snipers. And I got involved with the Taliban because the Taliban was doing the killing. That's the fighting force within Afghanistan. They don't bother doing that because, they deal with the wrong people all the time. But I got involved. And Abdul is the head of the Taliban. He is still the head of the Taliban. And I told Abdul, don't do it anymore. You do it anymore, you're going to have problems. And he said, why do you send me a picture of my house? I said, you're going to have to figure that out, Abdul. And for 18 months, we had nobody killed. We did have an agreement negotiated by Mike Pompeo. It was a very good agreement. The reason it was good, we were getting out. We would have been out faster than them, but we wouldn't have lost the soldiers. We wouldn't have left many Americans behind. We wouldn't have left $85 billion worth of brand new, beautiful military equipment behind. And just to finish, they blew it. The agreement said you have to do this, and they didn't do it. They didn't do it. The agreement was terminated by us because they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
I want to move on.
And these people did the worst withdrawal, and in my opinion, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. And by the way, that's why Russia attacked Ukraine, because they saw how incompetent she and her boss are.
President Trump, thank you. I want to move on now to race and politics in this country. Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care.
But I like the fact that, he's so bold to say it, like, when she's not there, but when he's there in front of her, so he's like, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. He's such a coward.
You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words. So
I don't know.
Whatever she wants to be. Yes, because, whatever I want to be, I want to be a multi-billionaire, I guess that's okay too. Listen, all right? People are saying that she's not really black, okay? Her father's Jamaican. Jamaicans, it's like, our father's of Jamaican descent and her mother's Indian descent, okay? She's black, for crying out loud. You can say she's biracial, she's part Indian, part black. It doesn't fucking matter, for Christ's sake. But it's so funny how he's so bold when she's not there. But when he's right in front of her, he doesn't mention it.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
Honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was he owned land, he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families. Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first black president of the United States. Yep. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this, want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. I meet with people all the time who tell me, can we please just have discourse about how we're going to invest in the aspirations and the ambitions and the dreams of the American people? Knowing that regardless of people's color or the language their grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division.
Vice President Harris, thank you. Lindsay?
President Trump, this is now your third time.
This is the most divisive presidency in the history of our country. There's never been anything like it. They're destroying our country. And they come up with things like what she just said. Going back many, many years, when a lot of people, including Mayor Bloomberg, agreed with me on the Central Park 5, they admitted, they said, they planned.
They didn't admit to it. They were forced. There's a difference, okay? So here's the thing. The Central Park 5 were coerced and forced to admit to a crime they never committed. This does happen all the time. There are some cops that actually say that they can actually lie, legally lie to people to get them to confess. They will wear people down if they think that they've got a case. It's been proven. There are many people that are sitting in prison, that did sit in prison for 20 years for crimes they never committed, but because they got a confession out of them, they had to spend years in prison. And these cops, there was no retribution against them. Some of them got promotions. Some of them were actually rewarded for their work and all their years of service. It's not it's not like this is a random occurrence. It happens a lot, and it is a shame, honestly. There are people that have sat in prison for crimes they never committed, but because the cops took advantage of them, or they just wore them down for hours of interrogation to make them admit to a crimes they never committed. And he's doubled down on this. These guys are innocent. The real person that committed the crime in Central Park admitted to it, and they were exonerated by DNA evidence, and he has doubled down, for crying out loud.
Guilty. And I said, well, if they pled guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately.
Nope.
And if they pled guilty, then they pled, we're not guilty. But this is a person that has to stretch back years, 40, 50 years ago, because there's nothing now. I built one of the greatest divisive presidency in the history of our country. There's never been anything. Years, 40, 50 years ago, because there's nothing now. I built one of the greatest economies in the history of the world, and I'm going to build it again. It's going to be bigger, better, and stronger. But they're destroying our economy. They have no idea what a good economy is. Their oil policies, every single policy. And remember this, she is Biden. You know, she's trying to get away from Biden. I don't know the gentleman. She says, she is Biden. The worst inflation we've ever had, a horrible economy because inflation has made it so bad, and she can't get away with that.
Thank you. Your time's up.
I want to respond to that, though. I want to just respond briefly. Clearly, I'm not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald Trump. And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country, one who believes in what is possible, one who brings a sense of optimism about what we can do instead of always disparaging the American people. I believe in what we can do to strengthen our small businesses, which is why I have a plan. Let's talk about our plans, and let's compare the plans. I have a plan to give startup businesses $50,000 tax deduction, to pursue their ambitions, their innovation, their ideas, their hard work. I have a plan, $6,000 for young families for the first year of your child's life to help you in that most critical stage of your child's development. I have a plan that is about allowing people to be able to pursue what has been fleeting in terms of the American dream by offering a help with down payment of $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. That's the kind of conversation, I believe, David, that people really want tonight, as opposed to a conversation that is constantly about belittling and name-calling. Let's turn the page
Vice President
and move
Harris,
forward.
thank you. Let's turn to policy.
President Trump, we have to move on. President Trump.
Let's turn to policy, please.
She has a plan to defund the police. She has a plan to confiscate everybody's gun.
President Trump,
she has
we do
a
have to
plan
move
to
on to
not
other
allow
issues.
fracking in Pennsylvania or anywhere else.
Okay,
That's what her
President.
plan is until just recently.
I just think
President Trump,
the
President
former
Trump,
president has
no,
said
I'm
something
sorry.
twice that I need to respond to.
I'm sorry, we're going to move on, Vice President Harris. President Trump, this is now your third time running for president. You have long vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. You have failed to accomplish that. You now say you're going to keep Obamacare, quote, unless we can do something much better. Last month, you said, quote, we're working on it. So tonight, 9 years after you first started running, do you have a plan, and can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health care. Always was. It's not very good today. And what I said, that if we come up with something, and we are working on things, we're going to do it, and we're going to replace it. But remember this. I inherited Obamacare because Democrats wouldn't change it. They wouldn't vote for it. They were unanimous. They wouldn't vote to change it. If they would have done that, we would have had a much better plan than Obamacare. But the Democrats came up. They wouldn't vote for it. I had a choice to make when I was president. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, never going to be great, or do I let it rot? And I felt I had an obligation, even though politically it would have been good to just let it rot and let it go away. I decided, and I told my people, the top people, and they're very good people. I have a lot of good people in that administration. We read about the bad ones. We had some real bad ones, too, and so do they. They have really bad ones. The difference is they don't get rid of them. But let me just explain. I had a choice to make. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, or do I let it rot? And I saved it. I did the right thing. But it's still never going to be great, and it's too expensive for people. And what we will do is we're looking at different plans. If we can come up with a plan that's going to cost our people, our population, less money and be better health care than Obamacare, then I would absolutely do it. But until then, I'd run it as good as it can be run.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan.
Love it. Oh, my God. I have concepts of a plan. My God, this guy is such an idiot. Here's the thing. During 2020, he told Chris Wallace, we will have a beautiful healthcare plan in 2 weeks. I'm going to sign a healthcare plan in 2 weeks. There was no healthcare plan. He said, nobody knows infrastructure better than I do. He did not provide an infrastructure bill. He didn't do any of these things. It's incredible. Like the fact that this guy says, I have a concept of a healthcare plan. He doesn't have a healthcare plan. Obamacare is not perfect, but it's better than what we had before. And the amazing thing about Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act is that it's put millions of people on healthcare. More people are now covered under the Affordable Care Act. Now, I don't have the Affordable Care Act because I have TRICARE, but there are people now that are covered under the Affordable Care Act. The Republicans have yet to present something that is adequate, something that is just as good or something better, but they have not done it. Why? because they believe the private sector is the best place for healthcare. And I've already stated, our country spends more on healthcare than any other first world nation, yet we have some of the worst care across the world. Like, you can go to another country. Like, I asked a friend of mine, Mike Hilliard, he's been a guest on the show. I asked him, do you think anybody in Australia would want American healthcare? He's like, absolutely not, because American healthcare is terrible. It really is.
I'm not president right now, but if we come up with something, I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive. And there are concepts and options we have to do that. And you'll be hearing about it in the not too distant future.
Vice President Harris, in 2017, you supported Bernie Sanders' proposal to do away with private insurance and create a government-run healthcare system. 2 years later, you proposed a plan that included a private insurance option. What is your plan today?
Well, first of all, I absolutely support, and over the last 4 years as vice president, private healthcare options. But what we need to do is maintain and grow the Affordable Care Act. But I'll get to that, Lindsay. I just need to respond to a previous point that the former president has made. I've made very clear my position on fracking. And then this business about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
If she has guns for real, I can guarantee Donald Trump doesn't. He's probably never shot a gun in his life. He probably doesn't even know what. He probably thinks guns bang bang. That's because he's made weird sounds with guns anyway. So.
As it relates to the Affordable Care Act, understand, just look at the history to know where people stand. When Donald Trump was president, 60 times he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. 60 times. I was a senator at the time. When I will never forget the early morning hours when it was up for a vote in the United States Senate, and the late, great John McCain, who you have disparaged as being, you don't like him, you said, at the time because he got caught. He was an American hero. The late, great John McCain, I will never forget that night, walked onto the Senate floor and said, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. You have no plan. And what the Affordable Care Act has done is eliminate the ability of insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. I don't have to tell the people watching tonight, you remember what that was like? Remember when an insurance company could deny if a child had asthma, if someone was a breast cancer survivor, if a grandparent had diabetes? And thankfully, as I've been vice president, and we over the last 4 years have strengthened the Affordable Care Act, we have allowed for the first time Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of you, the American people. Donald Trump said he was going to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. He never did. We did. And now we have capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Since I've been vice president, we have capped the cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000 a year. And when I am president, we will do that for all people, understanding that the value I bring to this is that access to health care should be a right and not just a privilege of those who can afford it. And the plan has to be to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, not get rid of it.
Vice President Harris,
in terms of where Donald Trump stands on that.
I want to move to an issue that's important for a lot of...
You made a mistake. Number one, John McCain fought Obamacare for 10 years. But it wasn't only him. It was all of the Democrats that kept it going. And you know what? We can do much better than Obamacare. Much less money.
What?
But she won't improve.
What? What can you do better than Obamacare? I still have not heard a plan from any Republican on what they can do as far as better health care. He still hasn't produced a plan. Now he just has concept of a plan. He's full of shit.
Private insurance for people. Private medical insurance. That's another thing she doesn't want to get. People are paying privately for
sweat. Oh my God, he is sweating like a pig, and she's just like, this motherfucker here.
Insurance that have worked hard and made money, and they want to have private. She wants everybody to be on government insurance where you wait 6 months for an operation that you need immediately.
President Trump, thank you. We have another issue that we'd like to get to that's important for a number of Americans, in particular younger voters, and that's climate change. President Trump, with regard to the environment, you say that we have to have clean air and clean water. Vice President Harris, you call climate change an existential threat. The question to you both tonight is, what would you do to fight climate change? And Vice President Harris, we'll start with you.
Talk about immigration, Donald Trump.
1 minute for you each.
Well, the former president had said that climate change is a hoax. And what we know is that it is very real. You ask anyone who lives in a state who has experienced these extreme weather occurrences, who now is either being denied home insurance or it's being jacked up. You ask anybody who has been the victim of what that means in terms of losing their home, having nowhere to go. We know that we can actually deal with this issue. The young people of America care deeply about this issue. And I am proud that as vice president over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy, while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels. We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs while I have been vice president. We have invested in clean energy to the point that we are opening up factories around the world. Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs. And I'm also proud to have the endorsement of the United Auto Workers and Sean Fain, who also know that part of building a clean energy economy includes investing in American-made products, American automobiles. It includes growing what we can do around American manufacturing and opening up auto plants, not closing them like happened under Donald Trump.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
It didn't happen under Donald Trump. Let me just tell you, they lost 10,000 manufacturing jobs this last month. It's going, they're all leaving. They're building big auto plants in Mexico, in many cases owned by China.
They were building plants in Mexico under Donald Trump's administration. Did people not realize that? Harley Davidson actually moved out of the United States because of his trade deals, because his trade deals were so atrocious.
They're building these massive plants, and they think they're going to sell their cars into the United States because of these people. What they have given to China is unbelievable. But we're not going to let that. We'll put tariffs on those cars so they can't come into our country, because they will kill the United Auto Workers and any auto worker, whether it's in Detroit or South Carolina or any other place. What they've done to business and manufacturing in this country is horrible. We have nothing because they refuse. You know, Biden doesn't go after people because supposedly China paid him millions of dollars. He's afraid to do it. Between him and his son, they get all this money from Ukraine. They get all this money from all of these different countries. And then you wonder, why is he so loyal to this one, that one, Ukraine, China? Why is he? Why did he get $3.5 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife? Why did she pay him $3.5 million? This is a crooked administration, and they're selling our country down the tubes.
President Trump, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with closing statements from both of our candidates. An historic night, this ABC News presidential debate.
I love how Donald Trump is so concerned about the money that, you know, they supposedly receive from foreign governments, but yet Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump received $2 billion from the Saudi government, essentially. We're also going to talk about like how Ivanka Trump got millions of dollars from the country of China for her trade deals and whatnot. People that are like, the man is the definition of nepotism. He's got people in his own family working on his administration, and they are enriching their lives, and they're using the influence by him being president, essentially, to get ahead in life. It's not even close. And yet people are so upset about like Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden is not a threat to national security. They're saying, oh my God, he only got that job because of his father's name. Well, look at Ivanka Trump. Look at Don Jr. and Eric Trump. These guys are not good at what they do. Jared Kushner, Donald Trump gave Jared Kushner jobs he was not even closely qualified for, but yet he was expected to perform on them. He was supposed to bring peace in the Middle East. He failed to do that. There was no peace in the Middle East. The Abraham Accord was a joke. The Abraham Accord did not bring peace to the Middle East. It just increased trade negotiations between countries that were not currently at war with one another. I mean, people consistently lie on this man's behalf. He calls people corrupt. He calls people fraudulent. This man is the biggest fraud and the biggest, most corrupt individual that has ever occupied the White House. And that's saying a lot. Like, I still want to say, you know, Andrew Hamilton was one of the most corrupt presidents out there, simply because of his deals, like basically paying reparations towards slave owners because they lost their slaves. So he paid them reparations. What a shitbag that guy is. But Donald Trump is without a doubt one of the most, the worst president in my lifetime, without a doubt. And the only one I could say that is like right behind him as far as like how bad he is, I gotta give it to Reagan, honestly. As much as I'd like to say Bush, but like, we are at the position we are right now because of the decisions that Reagan has made. Bush was bad. Bush was a horrendous president. Bill Clinton, what's the worst thing that he did?